Good morning, everyone. The time is now 10:01, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I recognize that a quorum is present for today's meeting. Since we are doing a virtual meeting, we would encourage all participants and listeners to please mute your microphones and telephones when you're not speaking. Also, before you speak, please state your name. We do appreciate your patience if any technical issues arise, and do know that we will try to resolve those technical issues immediately. At this time, I'd like to call on Ashley Rendon to call roll of the board members.
Thank you. Chair Stephanie Levy.
Present.
Keith Brainerd.
Present.
Marcia Dush.
Present.
Rosie Farina Strauss.
Present.
Christopher Gonzalez. I believe you're muted.
Present. Sorry, I was on mute.
Rob Reese.
Present.
Christopher Zook.
Present.
Thank you. And now, Ashley, if you can please provide a list of anyone who's pre-registered to provide public comment.
Yes, that would be David Stacy and Shara Crow.
Okay. Now we will move on to agenda item number 4, which is board administrative actions. First administrative action is related to the November 12th, 2020 meeting minutes. We will have a motion on this item. So if you'd like to make a motion or second, please identify yourself first for recordation purposes. And at this time, the chair will entertain a motion to suspend the reading of the minutes.
So moved by Marcia Dush.
Okay, the motion has been made by Mrs. Dush and seconded by Mr. Brainerd to suspend the reading of the minutes. Is there any discussion from the board or any corrections to the minutes as circulated? Okay, hearing none, we have a motion by Mrs. Dush, seconded by Mr. Brainerd. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes will not be read and are approved as circulated. Next agenda item is recognition of our outgoing board member. We do have Mr. Richards, who will be concluding his time of service with the board, and we do have a resolution related to his service. And so at this time, I will read that resolution. Whereas the State Pension Review Board has been honored by the appointment of many distinguished citizens to serve terms amongst its membership. And where Mr. Ernest Richards was appointed as a member of the State Pension Review Board by Governor Greg Abbott on November 30th, 2015. And whereas Mr. Ernest Richards has served with distinction in his roles on the Education and Research Committee and the Legislative Committee. And whereas the members of the board believe that Mr. Richards' loyal and outstanding service to the board, the public employees, and other citizens of Texas deserve special recognition. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board extends its deepest gratitude and appreciation to Mr. Richards for his devoted service and exemplary leadership and wish him the very best in the future. At this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mr. Richards if he'd like to say any words.
Ashley, we cannot hear him. Ashley, is there a problem on our end or?
No. Mr. Richards, we're unable to hear your audio. If you've joined by phone, then you would have to, I believe, push *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize. I think the problem is from my own end, not from your own end. I want to use this opportunity to thank Anu, her staff, and fellow board members for their outstanding work, in particular in developing the MET online courses, developing the soundness of restoration plan, and mediating the dispute between the City of Dallas and the Police Pension Fund. I am awfully grateful and thankful to God that we all survived the COVID-19 pandemic. I consider myself fortunate to have been a member of this board, that it makes it saying goodbye very hard. As we say goodbye, I remind ourselves that farewells are not forever, nor are they the end. I wish you all happy adventures, fantastic new friendships, amazing experiences, and the journey of lifetime. And again, I say thank you very much.
Thank you, Ernest. We appreciate those kind words, and you will be missed. You were a very valuable member of our board, and I think we all appreciate the time that we were able to serve together. I'll just briefly open it up to any other board members if they'd like to say a few words.
This is Keith Brainerd. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Ernest. I just wanted to echo what Chair Leiby said. I enjoyed serving with you. I enjoyed getting to know you and very much appreciate your service on this board. I hope we can stay in touch. Hope we can stay in touch.
Sure.
Well done, Ernest. Thank you for being a part.
Thank you.
Ernest, this is Marcia. Thank you very much, especially when I was a new board member. Thank you for your help in helping me acclimate to the board. I really did appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much. All right, guys, I'll say goodbye at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Okay, next agenda item is the introduction of our new board members. We do have 2 new board members who are joining us today for the first time. And so first I will introduce Mr. Rob Reese. Rob Reese is of Austin, and he's the Deputy Executive Commissioner for Compliance and Quality Control for the Texas Health and Human Services Commission, and previously served as a Senior Advisor to the Chief Policy and previously served as Senior Advisor to the Chief Policy and Regulatory Officer at HHSC. Prior to his work at HHSC, he served as Budget and Finance Director for the Texas Facilities Commission. Rob received a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from the University of Texas of Austin and a Master's of Business Administration from Texas State University. At this time, I'll ask Rob Reese if he'd like to make any remarks.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'm very thankful and grateful for the opportunity to serve alongside you on this board. I look forward to providing guidance and support to Anu and her team, who I have been nothing but impressed with to date. I think either directly, as in my case, or indirectly, most, if not all of us are impacted by a public retirement system or the public retirement systems of our state in aggregate. I think they are a critical component of the fabric of our society and our culture. And I really look forward to strengthening that fabric alongside each of you to the best of our ability as we continue this journey. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, members. I look forward to serving with you.
Thank you. Welcome aboard. I think we all look forward to serving along with you as well. Our next new member is Mr. Christopher Gonzalez. Christopher Gonzalez is of Cypress, Texas, and he's the Director of Global Pensions and Investments for Lindell-based Industries. He previously served as Executive Director and Chief Investment Officer for the Houston Firefighters Relief and Retirement Fund. Christopher received a Bachelor's of Business Administration and Finance from Houston Baptist University and a Master of Business Administration from University of Houston. At this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Gonzalez if he'd like to make any remarks.
Yes, hi, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate that. Certainly excited and to echo Rob's comments about Anu and her team at PRB. Very excited about the assignment and the appointment. Looking forward to working with all of you over the coming years. I think my experience, both on the public pension side, the corporate pension side, both US and non-US, as well as my earlier career on the consulting side, specifically for investments, should benefit the group and the entity in a way that we can bring sort of the experience of actual management of pension plans and investment portfolios related to pension plans to the table. I have certain ideas that I'd like to bring forward over time. I think I'll use the next couple of meetings to get acclimated with this setting and understanding of its objectives and goals, but ultimately want to provide value to the group so that when we look back in several years, we can say that as a group, we've created an environment where Texas pensions are transparent, reporting is accurate, and stakeholders understand exactly what it is they do and how they do it.
Perfect. Well, welcome aboard, and we too look forward to working with you and look forward to hearing the ideas that you have both for this board and for the agency. Our next administrative item is related to the election of our vice chair for 2021. Or I guess for 2022 is probably the correct term for this position. Before we do open the floor for nominations, I would like to recognize Vice Chair Brainerd for his continued and very much dedicated service as Vice Chair for the PRB. I think he brings a lot of value to our board, and we are definitely very lucky to have him. I will open the floor for nominations for vice chair. Would anyone like to make a nomination at this time?
I would move for Keith Brainerd to continue in that role.
Thank you. Are there any additional nominations? Hearing no additional nominations for the office of vice chair, the nominations are closed. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay. All those in favor of re-electing Mr. Brainerd as vice chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and Mr. Brainerd is re-elected as vice chair. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board. Appreciate your confidence.
Okay, and then moving it over to our next agenda item, which is the Actuarial Committee. I will actually turn it over to Vice Chair Brainerd to move through this agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask Brian Burnham to please provide us with a report on reporting and compliance. Mr. Burnham.
Thank you very much. Good morning, board. My name is Brian Burnham. I'm a financial analyst with the Pension Review Board staff. I don't want to take up too much time today because I know we got a lot to get through. So for the compliance report, I'd really like to focus on the list of the plans that are non-compliant over 60 days. The last couple of meetings, for those who were on the board then, you would recognize that Nagadoches has been on this list for a while, but I am happy to say in the past, they were on this list for multiple years, dating all the way back to 2017. And currently, they had just recently completed an audit and sent it to our office. Unfortunately, there was some miscommunication with their auditor. They were planning and hoping that their auditor would be able to incorporate fiscal year 2020, 2019, 2018 all into one audit so that we would have that information available to us. The audit that they did complete and accept only contained 2019 and 2018 data. So they are still working on the 2020 report, and they have promised that they will get that to us soon. But they are getting to the point where they will be coming off this list hopefully very soon, and have been very good about communicating with us and getting us the proper reports lately. The other two plans on this list, we have the Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund. This is for the fiscal year 2019, which was due almost a year ago now. The report that they're missing, they're only missing one of the annual required reports. It's the Investment Returns and Assumptions Report, the PRB 1000. They have actually sent in a PRB 1000, but it was non-compliant due to some issues with the report not being fully completed, and then some inconsistencies with some of the numbers in the report, where a number was reported as net of fees in one of the sections and then reported as gross of fees in the other section. So there are some things to clean up with the report, and then they would become compliant once that has happened and been submitted to our office. The final plan, University Park Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund, we have actually had difficulties contacting the plan representative for the plan. They have not been responsive to phone calls or emails or returning our messages. However, we have been in contact with members of the city, specifically the City of University Park CFO, who has assured us that he is working with the plan to try and get us the information that is required, and also working to figure out why the plan has not been communicative with us. And I'm open for any questions on any of the items you see on this page.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian from the board? Brian, can you I have a question, please. Can you please remind us of the status of University Park? Is that a closed plan? Do they have staff there?
Yeah, so University Park is a closed plan. It was a couple legislative sessions ago that they had a bill in order to move into TMRS. And so I'm pretty sure that the new members of the pension system are now within TMRS itself. So what they would be reporting to us would be the old members who are still due their old pension benefits and have not been fully met yet.
Thank you. It sounds like Nacogdoches is on their way off of this list. Is that right?
Correct. They have been very diligent at working with us and communicating with us on their issues. And they hope to have the 2020 financial report completed sometime this year.
Thank you. And one other question on Midland. Is Midland indicated that they will be responding to our request for compliance on the 1,000?
I am not advised on the communications with Midland on the PRB 1000 at this time. I do believe that they would be working on it and would be giving us an updated report, but there's obviously more communication going on with them as we are doing the intensive review on Midland. And so that communication has been with other parties within the PRB than with myself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll be discussing Midland later, so we can bring that up. Any questions for Brian? Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, next I'd like to call on Staff Actuary Kenny Herbold to talk to us about actuarial valuation report and similar items. Kenny, welcome.
Good morning, members. Thank you very much. My name is Kenny Herbold. I am the staff actuary for the Pension Review Board. I have a few prepared remarks for our evaluation report. Ashley, if you can go to the next slide. And if you can increase it size just a little bit, that'd be great. So I'm just gonna have a few comments here. I will note that we have 44 new valuations since the November board meeting. We are seeing, so you can see a comparison of the results we had in the middle column from the November board meeting to the current board meeting in the far left column. And then the far right column is the prior valuation for each of the plans. So you can compare that against well, the most recent valuation that we're showing in the left column. So from the November board meeting, we have 44 new valuations. We are seeing the same trends that I've noted over the last couple of years at this point. We're seeing decreasing discount rates. The nice thing is it does seem to be having a minimal impact on the overall amortization periods or the average amortization periods of the plans. Obviously, as discount rates come down, the liability is going to increase, and that is impacting the specific plans to some degree, but overall, the amortization periods do seem to be relatively steady. There's overall, they're coming down to some degree as well. Drilling in a little bit to the plan discount rate table below, 21 of the 44 new valuations that we received did include a change in discount or a decrease in the discount rate. And those ranged anywhere from 10 basis points to 100 basis points. And I think as we've seen in the past, 25 basis points is generally the most common from one valuation to the next. If you'll notice in that table, we do still have 2 plans that are identified as having a discount rate of 8% or above. Both of those are actually at 8%. One of those, Texas County and District, did lower their assumed rate of return. We just have not received a valuation with the 7.5% discount rate that they changed to yet. So that should be in our next board report. The other one is Sweetwater Fire. Their last valuation was 12/31/2018. So we are expecting another valuation as of 12/31/2020. And given their relatively small plan, there's generally a fairly significant delay in timing on that. So we would expect to receive that next valuation probably at the end of this year, early next year. And we have not heard anything as to whether or not they're actually lowering their discount rate or not. A couple of other comments. None of these numbers reflect the new legislation that went into, that was passed in this most recent session. Obviously, there's going to be some more discussion of that later, but just quickly, ERS had some pretty significant legislation, which will have a fairly large impact on their amortization period, as well as Austin Police. So if you're looking at the detail on the next slide, ERS and Austin Police both have infinite amortization periods, but then those will be expected to come down once we reflect the new legislation. Finally, my only other comment that I have, I do want to follow up on a question from the November board meeting. The board chair, Marcia Dush, had requested follow-up on the status of intensive review plans and where they are at this point. We did provide an update in our biennial report to the legislature, and our plan going forward is to provide annual updates to the Actuarial Committee. So our next update would be expected to be at the next Actuarial Committee meeting. And then you can also see when we get to talking about the intensive review plans in a later agenda item, those plans are the ones that we have performed an intensive review on are also highlighted in that metric spreadsheet, so you can see that as well. Now, I don't have any comments on the detailed reports for new board members and members of the public who aren't familiar with the information that we have. We have 3 separate reports in here. We have an actuarial valuation report, which we're looking at right now, which kind of provides information on the funding. We have another report called the supplemental report, which is primarily accounting information. And then we have more information in the contribution report as well, which kind of compares the actuarially recommended contribution to the actual contribution. So I don't have any specific comments on any of this detail, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of what the reports contain. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that might exist.
Kenny, this is Marcia Dush. I have a couple questions for you. With respect to the plans that are reporting, especially the new valuations that have come in, where the discount rate is greater than 7.5%, have any of those actuarial reports been qualified by the actuary? And maybe you can explain what I'm asking about because of the new ASOP rules.
Sure. So a recent actuarial standard of practice changed the way in which actuaries are required to comment on the assumptions that are being used. So obviously the actuaries are recommending assumptions to the board, but all of the assumptions are the board's responsibility, and ultimately the board is required to make the decisions regarding all of the economic and demographic assumptions. So when those recommendations are made, if a board, say, decides to stick with an assumed rate of return higher than a recommended amount, and the actuary believes that that number is not reasonable, they are now, in the past, they could remain silent as long as in total the amounts were, the valuation was reasonable. Now that the actuaries are required to have a positive response to indicate that they believe all of the assumptions included, both individually and in total, are reasonable. And to the extent that they believe any of the assumptions are not, they would have to make a comment on that and then report additional liabilities using reasonable assumptions. As far as I'm aware, no actuaries have done that yet in any of the valuations that we have received.
Okay, in the future, again, I would ask that you and the staff kind of keep your eyes open for, as you get the actuarial reports, and if there are qualifications by the actuary, that be reported as part of the report on the actuarial valuations.
Sure.
Another question that I had was on depletion dates, and I just focused on the ones that had depletion dates within the next 20 years. And I noticed that the judicial and the law enforcement, but that's part of ERS, and I think you've addressed that. The only other one is Longview, and I just wanted to ask about Longview. I know we're still waiting on an FSRP for Longview. I guess I just wanted to highlight that I just wanted to highlight that that they have a depletion date within 20 years, and that, you know, again, we'll talk about it when we get to the FSRP, but the longer it takes to develop a remedy to their situation, the harder it's going to be. And so then my last comments are on.
Marcia, if I may, Ashley, can you go to that page, please, so that it's on the screen for the board and also the audience, and zoom in just a little bit. I just want to be able to see what she's referring to regarding Longview.
It would be on the
2 pages down, 2 slides down, I think, Ashley. So, try 31.
And this is a calculation that's done as part of financial reporting.
Yeah, so the very last column here is called the expected depletion date, which is a required calculation under accounting rules. And this calculation is basically the actuary is projecting out expected benefit payments against current assets and expected future contributions specifically related to current active employees. So if there are any contributions related to new employees, those are not included in the calculation. But this is basically a determination of when the trust fund, again, taking into account future contributions, is expected to run out of money. So when the benefit payments are ultimately going to be larger than contributions and assets on hand.
You know, Kenny, this is Christopher again. I apologize for not saying this in the past, but, you know, we have this table sorted by name. When I think about finding what matters specifically on this particular report, that expected depletion date to me is the most important thing on here, because of the fact that if the plan doesn't remedy its situation, it's going to run out of money and not be able to pay the benefits to those people. So if we can in future reports actually sort it by the most current at the top, so that way we can see who is most soon to run out of money, i.e., you know, in this case, you know, the 2038 date for Longview is so much closer than we might really appreciate, and that's a scary thing. So if we could do that in the future, I'd really appreciate it.
And then once it's into the NAs for depletion dates, then alphabetical would be fine, I think.
Agreed. Totally agree.
All right, then I have one last comment, and that is on the contribution reports, which is the next set of reports. So Ashley, if you could advance to just the first page of the contribution reports. Again, what I would like to make a comment on is, again, focusing on the last couple of columns, which is the actuary or Kenny's staff reports on what an ADC, actuarially developed contribution, is for the plan, and then how much the plan is actually contributing, and then calculates what percentage of the contribution is related to the ADC. And what is disturbing to me is I know that when they calculate the ADC, that's based on a 30-year amortization, where the amortization payment is calculated as a percentage of pay, and everybody expects the pay to increase into the future. So that the fact of the matter is that the first year of that contribution is not even covering the normal cost plus interest on the unfunded. So even if you were making the so-called ADC contribution that's listed there, and Kenny, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you're not even covering interest on the unfunded liability. So the fact that there are so many plans, and you can see in the very last column here, that there are a lot of plans who are not even making 100% of the ADC contribution. So what that tells me is that, we just have a problem with increasing unfunded liabilities into the future, adding to, generational difficulties, adding to, just not really tackling, tackling and taking down the unfunded. And what I really do hope is that with a lot of these plans, they have new funding policies. And I hope that with the new funding policies, as they kick into gear, that we'll see this last column change so that more of the plans are making at least 100% of that 30-year amortization payment. And that's really all I have on comments.
Marcia, I think it's a great point. This is Christopher. One of the things that somebody asked me to explain this the other day, and I think for the general audience, this is such technical stuff. I think it'd be really helpful to give them something that I said to someone else that just really helped explain it. So everybody knows if you have a credit card and it's got 18% interest on the credit card and you pay the minimum payment and you're not paying the interest in that payment, then the balance is going to continue to increase every single month if you're just making the minimum payment. So we all know that that's a bad idea, but yet we have this entire page of plans that are literally not covering their interest payments and their operating expenses every year, which means we're going to be adding to the unfunded liabilities every single month, every single quarter, every single year. And that's something that it creates, as you put so eloquently, I mean, it's a generational problem. It's just kicking the can down the road in such a way that that's just going to set people up for failure or for having to do real significant modifications at some point in the future. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I know, and again, maybe either Kenny or Anu can comment on this, but some of the funding policy statements do stay. If they haven't made the ADC something close to the ADC over a period of a couple of years, then they'll kick their contribution levels up. But again, I really do believe this is a problem we're facing, attributed to the fixed contribution type plan, where these contribution levels haven't been updated in order to really pay for the benefits that are accruing.
This is Keith Brainerd. I'd like to comment. I appreciate you, Marcia, bringing that up. And Christopher, your points are spot on. This is a serious problem facing some of these plans. I would point out that in some places outside of the state of Texas, paying something less than the full required contribution just doesn't happen. It's not allowed, either by law or by culture. And for this to continue to happen for so long as it has, particularly among some plans in particular, to me is highly problematic and is one of a number of reasons that the overall governance of public pension plans in the state of Texas needs to be addressed. And governance is something that we're going to be talking about later in this meeting and in the coming months. But the employer's contribution, and that is one other thing I think it's helpful to remember, which is that these are not the plans that are making the contribution or failing to make the contribution. It's the plan sponsor, it's the cities, it's the state, and so on. And it's an important distinction for us to keep in mind that when the contribution falls short, that is on the plan sponsor. Now, in some cases, frankly, sometimes the plan has agreed to terms in Texas to allow the plan sponsor to pay less than the required contribution. But I think that something that this board ought to agree on is that the full required contribution at a minimum should always be paid every year.
And Keith, you use the term required contribution. I would use the term actuarially determined contribution, which is, referencing this 30-year amortization. And because of the governance situation, it's not technically required. But again, because so many of these plans have fixed contribution arrangements that are not required to look at what the ADC, the actuarially determined contribution is, it's strictly that it must be reported what the ADC is each year. We can see it, but I don't think there's a requirement anywhere that says that at this point that they need to fund up to the actuarially determined contribution.
Yes, thank you, Marcia. I believe that's correct. Other questions for Kenny?
Yes, hi, this is Chris Gonzalez. I do have a question. Going back to page 25, if you can. And these are sort of high-level questions. So at the top of the page, funded ratios, do you have information as to how these funded ratios for the Texas plans compares nationally against other public pension plans? So 77, respectively 76.8 for the previous year versus what it looks like nationally. Is it on the low end, the high end, right in the middle?
I don't have specific numbers. Off the top of my head, I would say 77 is reasonable comparatively. I'm not saying it's a good number to be at. Obviously, we highlight the fact that 100% is the goal, but in general, I would say that 77, when you compare across the nation, there's a pretty wide range of where these plans are funded. I also think it's extremely helpful to recognize that within Texas, there's 99 plans that we're currently reporting. We always say 100 because we have one that we're waiting on reporting information from. But of these 99 plans, those funded ratios range, I think at the moment, maybe as low as 40%, up to over 100%. So when we are looking at aggregate statistics, Texas teachers is the biggest driver. It generally is, where are we? We're right around 300 billion. They are over 50% of the values that we're looking at here. So when we're looking at things in the aggregate, Texas teachers is going to have a significant impact. So really when we drill down and look at the individual plans, we see a lot of concerning funded ratios and some potential issues. So I think it just depends on which plan you're looking at more than the aggregate.
Okay, and so that 77% is a weighted average then, or
it's a straight average.
Okay.
Right? So you can calculate it from the numbers that are shown right there. So
okay.
Well, actually, Kenny, I'm sorry to be the one to add to your workload, but I think Christopher brings up a tremendous point in that it would be really helpful to just add one line to this table that just shows the median funded ratio, as well as either weighted average or a median. I think median might accomplish the same objective, but whatever y'all think would be most representative to help us track and monitor how the typical plan is, and not have so much weight given to TRS because it is so much of the total AUM.
Yeah, Chris, and Kenny,
Right.
I think showing the range would be really interesting. I mean, that does feed into the later discussion on how we determine which plans to put under intensive review, because funded ratio is one of the very important things besides amortization period that I am concerned about. And I've mentioned this in prior board meetings and prior actuarial committee meetings, is I really would like to put under the spotlight those plans that have particularly ratios. We have some in the 30s and in some in the 40s. I want to be sure that those plans have either been under intensive review or go under intensive review, and that we keep an eye on them.
I think that would be a helpful point of data.
No, it would be, and Kenny, and staff, I mean, we know that the plan amortization periods that are so wonderfully color coded there translate effectively to, significantly low funded ratios. But for the non, policy pension experts, it's not necessarily a clear connection. And so actually, if you'll page down to the report that shows that, if we could create, Kenny and staff, if we could create effectively the same kind of color-coded table on that summary page, and it may get smaller or we may go to 2 pages, but to be able to show the funded ratios, because we don't sort it here by funded ratio, we do it by the amortization period, which obviously is not a direct correlation. So you've got, obviously Plainview down here at 34%, and then you have obviously, as you said, others at 100+%. I think it's something that we really should have jump out at everybody who participates in this process to be able to highlight where the challenges, are, so we can be proactive instead of reactive and try to help as much as we can to drive those numbers higher for the benefit of those beneficiaries. So if we could do that next quarter, that'd be really, really helpful.
I think we can certainly move towards that. It's also obviously the funded. We'll have a little bit more conversation on this later, but funded ratio is more relevant given the recent changes to our funding soundness restoration program as well. So I think that, and we do have some highlighting related to that on our intensive review metric spreadsheet that I'll be providing more detail on under a later agenda item as well.
And I do have one other question, maybe two. They're quick. Similar question for plan discount rates nationally. How do these compare? So are we overweighted above 7? Are we underweighted? I think I know the answer for corporate plans, but I haven't looked at public in a while. But I think it'd be important to see what the trends are.
Absolutely. I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
And we can add national averages to the summary spreadsheet as well. I will note that we have generally Texas plans have generally fallen in line with national averages when it comes to the average of our discount rates. I will also highlight that our data center includes some of this information. So we can go to our public pension data center and see, I believe we've started, I'm not sure if we've started including national averages on there just yet, but we have discussed that as one of the enhancements. We do have Texas averages, but
I'll be certain to check that out. And my last question is regarding verification of these discount rates. You talked about the actuary's role in, I guess, confirming, whether or not the discount rate that any given plan uses is okay in their process. What about the audit, the annual audit? Are the auditing firms also accountable for confirming that the rate is, can be measured up to?
I can't answer confidently with the level of review that is provided by the auditor. I think practically speaking, it depends on how the size of the auditor, how many pension plans they audit versus just more general, a general municipality practice. And so I'm not personally familiar with the specific requirements that the auditors are following with respect to that.
Okay, that's fine. And the reason I ask is because for corporate plans under ERISA, as part of the audit, the auditor has to verify the reasonableness of the expected rate of return using their own capital market assumptions and building it out themselves. And so we have 3 checkpoints, internally, the fiduciary committee, the actuary, and the auditor all have to confirm that it's a reasonable discount rate. So it's just another checkpoint, an independent checkpoint.
Chris, this is Marcia. I believe that the auditors can rely on the actuary because the actuary also produces the forecast of the contributions in order to determine the depletion date, if there is one. But the audit does include, and Kenny, again, correct me if I'm wrong, the auditor will include expectations of returns by asset class. And again, while you can't necessarily just mathematically multiply, the expected return by the percentage of assets in that particular class and come up with an overall average. I mean, you can see what the auditor is using as asset class expected returns. And so there is some kind of check there that if they're using 7 3/4 and you have only one asset class that is expected to earn over 7.5%, it's pretty hard to hit 7 3/4.
Sure.
So, again, by looking at the audit, you can do some basic basic calculation as to what you would expect as the expected return.
Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for your questions, which are spot on. Obviously, members, there's a wealth of information in this report, which comes to us at every meeting. Staff spends a fair bit of time compiling all of this, which we appreciate. And I would encourage you, if you've not already, to delve into these numbers and feel free to work on your own with staff to make sure that you understand it. These numbers really get to the heart of much of what this board is about. And it's important that we all have a sense for these numbers and understanding of what they mean. So thank you for your suggestions. Other questions for staff? I can tell you that the national average right now for the nominal investment return assumption is 7.1%. The median is right at 7%. So Texas plans are right in there, but it runs a wide range too. Kenny, is that all on the actuarial valuation report?
Yes, I don't have any additional prepared remarks.
Thank you. On to the funding soundness restoration plan. Is that you also, Kenny?
It is, yes.
Thank you, please.
Okay, so starting on pages 40 and 41, we have the three new FSRPs, funding soundness restoration plans, that we have received since the November board meeting. That's Orange Fire, Irving Fire, and I believe Plainview. I apologize if the name on the next page is escaping me. The changes, I'm not going to spend any time here really, but the changes are a combination of contribution increases and some benefit changes. As you can note, the Irving Fire did lower their assumed rate of return as well. And so this is pretty common with what we've seen. So moving on, I'm sorry. The resulting amortization periods where these plans currently are can be seen on slide 44, which is the progress report of all the plans that have submitted an FSRP and are currently going through the process. Sorry, Ash, I didn't mean to switch to that immediately. Slide 42 is the next table, and this is systems that are immediately subject to the FSRP requirement. As you can see, all of these plans are currently past due. We've talked about a number of these, and we've already had some conversation about a couple of them today. Midland did come to our August 2020 Actuarial Committee meeting. They provided an update on the status of their FSRP. We discussed that at the November 2020 board meeting as well. And obviously they'll be part of further discussions and later agenda items as well, but we don't have any new updates related to the status of their FSRP at this time. For Longview, again, there was some discussion under the actuarial valuation report. Just as a quick reminder, they did make a number of changes from 2012 through 2018. And then they got their 2018 valuation, which did result in the need for their FSRP. Prior to our November board meeting, their board chair indicated that due to COVID-related budget concerns, no additional changes were currently being considered. We have attempted to reach out to them since that time to get an update for this meeting, and we have not heard anything back yet. Marshall Fire and Beaumont Fire, both plans have made changes that are expected to meet the requirements of the FSRP, but they are currently waiting on their next valuation to provide an updated amortization period. So they did not do a separate calculation that they provided to us with the results of those changes yet. And given that they are both 12/31/2018 was their most recent valuation, we do expect to see those within the next few months. Dallas Employees Retirement Fund is the last plan on the list. We've had numerous conversations with them since late last year. The plan is currently expected to create a joint task force with the city. And that, given the timing of the creation of that task force, that task force isn't expected to begin work until January of 2022, in which they hope to develop a plan to take to voters. And the earliest that they could do that would be either May or November of 2022. And as far as we are aware, the fund itself is currently working on modeling up some potential changes so the task force can hit the ground running once it gets started in January.
Kenny, again, it's Marcia. Again, this is a subject that I've commented on before, but I would certainly hope that the plans that have not yet developed, that are subject to the FSRP requirement, but have not yet developed an FSRP, recognize that there's really an incentive here to get one put together because of the changes that are coming through that the legislature passed with respect to FSRP requirements. They're going to be more strict, and I certainly supported grandfathering, for those plans that were already working with an FSRP. There is some grandfathering. I would hope that these plans would understand what the grandfathering is and perhaps choose to go ahead and get an FSRP put together so that they can take advantage of the FSRP. I had really supported the grandfathering with the hope that these plans that needed it would go ahead and make their changes as quickly as possible.
This is Keith. I would remind the members, especially our newer members, that an FSRP is an instrument of state statute. Statute describes, specifies when these plans are required to perform a funding soundness restoration plan under certain conditions regarding their actuarial condition. And changes were made to those statutes in the most recent legislative session. We'll be talking in more detail about those changes and about their effects. Could I ask Ashley, please, to back up to page 41? 41, right in there. I really appreciate the information provided under plan changes, showing the change in contribution rates from employees, employers, and then other, which seems to pertain to benefit levels, actuarial assumptions, and so on. In some places you did this, in those that you did not, I would like to ask that when possible, try to indicate where the change is coming from. So for example, on page 40, Irving Fire, the new benefit tier, the multiplier is 3%. If you could show what the old benefit tier was so we have a sense of the magnitude of the change or the type of change that's going on, that would be helpful.
We can certainly add that to the approach.
Thank you. And again, I find it very helpful to see the kind of changes that plans and plan sponsors are making to these plans in response to these actuarial challenges. Kenny, did you have more on the status of FSRPs?
I have a few more comments.
Please.
Page 43. We show the systems that are currently at risk. Obviously, this is based off of the existing rules as they exist right now. As we will discuss later, the new legislation is effective September 1, 2021. So this will change going forward. But one thing I did think that was somewhat relevant to note is there are 3 plans on here that have previously completed an FSRP and are now at risk again of being subject to the requirement. And that was really the only item, the only additional item. The next slide we have shows the progress report on page 44. And then we also...
Kenny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Note on that slide, Austin Police should fall off once we have the updated numbers, once we receive the updated numbers, given the legislative reform, the pension reform that was just passed.
Yes,
for Austin
definitely.
Police.
Yes, again, so this, I mean, none of this reflects any of the recent legislation, and there's certainly, there might be a couple of valuations that are in-house that didn't get included on here or that are on their way for more recent numbers.
Kenny, this is Keith Brainerd. I don't want to put you on the spot, so if you don't know off the top of your head, you can get back with us. You indicated there are 3 plans here at risk of going back into an FSRP where they had been there before. Do you recall which plans those are?
Yeah, I apologize. I should have been more clear. There's a footnote. Footnote number 1 identifies those plans. So there's Dallas Police and Fire Pension System, Galveston Fire, and Sweetwater Fire.
Thank you. I should have read the fine print. Sorry about that. And do you recall in general, I know about Dallas Fire and Police, regarding the other 2, did they make substantive changes in response to their FSRP?
I think some of them were fairly substantive. I don't remember exactly the changes that were made. I do have a little bit of information on what is moving them back in the direction towards what increased their assumed rate, or their amortization period. So Galveston Fire, they did lower their discount rate and made a number of other assumption changes. And based on their valuation, reducing their discount rate by 25 basis points and also updating their mortality table increased their amortization period by 35 years. So that was the largest impact on them. So it wasn't poor experience. It was just more reasonable assumptions, essentially. So I think that's a good indicator that you kind of want to make sure that those are reasonably conservative in advance or when you are doing your FSRP to avoid coming back to the table and having to do more simply because you're becoming slightly more conservative in your assumptions. And then Sweetwater, while they added a new tier in 2017, their amortization period isn't actually reflecting a decreasing normal cost. So the way that these amortization periods are calculated are not all necessarily exactly the same from one plan to another. Many of our plans are doing what we call open group projections, where they are reflecting a changing population. And with new tiers of benefits with lower cost, the amount of money, even on a fixed rate plan, the amount of money going to pay off the unfunded, and therefore how the amortization period is being calculated, gets larger and larger as a percentage of pay, because the cost of the benefits as new people come in under these new tiers of benefits get smaller and smaller. So for Sweetwater, their increase doesn't actually reflect that impact. And so when they come in next time around, depending on where their amortization period is, that could be something that they choose to reflect instead. And that would have I guess that would help lower their expected funding period for when we're looking at it.
Yeah, but Kenny, this is Marcia again. I think Sweetwater, that was one of the plans that's still at 8%, was at 8%, 12/31/18. So they probably have, if they're going to lower their investment expected discount rate, they'll have a hit because of that.
Absolutely. So they were the one that was still at 8%. And so that's going to have a pretty big impact on where they end up.
Yeah, one comment, and to emphasize something that you said, Kenny, and that is all else equal, simply a change in actuarial assumption, a reduction in the investment return assumption can potentially put a plan into FSRP status. We're seeing not only in Texas, but around the country, plans rush to reduce their investment return assumption. And I think it's helpful for all of us to keep in mind what effect lower return assumption can have in a number of ways, including the potential for going into FSRP status. Thank you, Kenny.
And so just one quick comment on the last slide. We do keep track of all the plans that have that have submitted an FSRP and have fallen off the list. We don't have their most recent information. It's on page 45, I believe. We don't have their most recent information on here. This is just the valuation that dropped them off the list. But we kind of keep track of that so we know when they come back, we can note that they have, or if they come back on the at-risk list or become subject again. And that's all the comments I have for the FSRP.
Thank you, Kenny. Questions for Kenny? Other questions? Thank you, Kenny. And I think we'll be revisiting the issue of FSRPs in general here later in the meeting. Next, on to the intensive actuarial review of the Midland Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund. And Kenny, can you please point out what page of the packet you're on?
Certainly, we are on page 46 at the moment. Actually, if you can go to page 47, we have a few things in here. So it's actually been a couple of years since we've looked at this information. So I wanted to give a brief history for new members, but also a reminder for those of you who have been around for a little while and have seen this or helped create it, but may not remember exactly what it looks like. So this is a little bit difficult to see. I've got another spreadsheet later that we will zoom in on to look at some numbers. So first, I just want to kind of focus on the headers. The metrics that we have 8 metrics that the board developed several years ago to provide an objective way to narrow plans down to start a more intensive individual look at these plans. Those metrics include the amortization period, the funded ratio, the unfunded as a percentage of payroll, which is essentially a way to try and figure out the systems, or the sponsor's ability to pay. It's a metric to kind of gauge, without looking specifically at sponsor at their size. It's just a way to gauge potential dangers in how much it's going to cost the sponsor. We look at the assumed rate of return or the discount rate, the payroll growth rate, which is used to help calculate the amortization period and has an impact on the amortization period itself and on that calculation, because it's how quickly we are assuming the contributions go up, given that the majority of our plans report contributions on a percentage of pay basis. Those are all information that we generally find in our funding valuations. And then we have a couple of metrics that come from the accounting required reporting. So we look at the actual contribution as a percentage of the ADC. So this is where we compare, generally speaking, to the 30-year rate that Marcia was describing earlier. We have the non-investment cash flow as a percentage of the funded net position, which is another term for market value of assets. And this is intended to look at primarily the difference between contributions and distributions. To be in a large negative number isn't necessarily indicative of a problem, but depending on where the plan is in its life cycle, can be an indicator of potential liquidity problems. And then finally, the last column is the drop as a percentage of assets. Drop is a deferred retirement option plan, and this is generally the ability for plan members to retire on paper while they're still working, and then defer their annuity payments into the fund. A number of our plans have offered guaranteed rates of return on these account balances, and because of that, it can grow fairly rapidly. When you have a guaranteed return of 8% versus actual investment returns of 3 or 4, that generally isn't the case any longer, because most plans have started to lower their guaranteed return if they even offer a return. But again, this is a good indicator of potential liquidity problems because these assets can generally be withdrawn at any time. All it takes is a plan member to actually retire, walk out the door, and they can pull their funds out. So if you have a large value, I think looks like Beaumont Fire is highlighted in blue there at the very top, and it looks like it's approximately 34%, which is pretty high number, and potential could certainly cause some potential issues if all of that money was to be pulled out all at one time. So I'd like to go ahead if you have questions, please.
No.
Okay, so I'd like to move to slide 49, which is the key. So I can talk a little bit more about our color coding. And again, these were all items that were, so if you go 2 pages down, Ashley, there we go. So this kind of gives a better understanding of why some of them are colored and some of them are not. The amortization period discount rates, those are the general colors that we've used in the actuarial evaluation report. We've split the funded ratios into 4 groups. There's nothing special about these 4 groups specifically. These are just some nice round numbers that were decided upon by the board on easy ways to identify those that are most extreme. The unfunded as a percentage of payroll, payroll growth rate, actual contribution, and non-investment cash flow, we're basically looking at the worst quartile. So 2 of that case, it's labeled as the top quartile because those are high, and high is bad. The other is bottom quartile because low is bad. And then finally, drop as a percentage of assets. Anything that is over 15% of total assets, we've highlighted. And this key kind of gives you a quick summary of the plans that fall into each of these categories. Finally, if you see on the previous 2 pages, if any of the names are highlighted, if they're highlighted blue, it's an indication of plans that we have already completed an intensive review on. So this is one place where you can get a quick sense of where those plans stand. And the yellow ones are the reviews that are currently in process. And if there are no questions, we'll move on to the next page. Yes, Marcia.
Kenny, I would just like to go back to, especially for the benefit of the new board members, the discussion on payroll growth rate. And again, it's a numerical calculation when we do the amortization. And the question is, or the issue is, the higher the payroll growth rate that is assumed means that more of the payment of the unfunded is pushed to future years. And so one of the things that I have been very concerned about is whether or not the plans have a realistic assumption with respect to payroll growth rate, particularly for mature municipalities where they don't intend to, grow their membership, in any great way. So, if it's an area of growth where there's a lot of new housing or something like that, you could see an expectation that there would be a relatively high growth. But for mature municipalities, you want to make sure that this is aligned with really what their expectations are with respect to growth and CPI and wage growth. And so, we used to see 4%, 4.5% growth rates pushing the payment of unfunded liabilities into the distant future. And so to see that the payroll growth rates are coming down, that's also just as important as taking a more realistic look at discount rates.
Thank you, Marcia. And I do want to say, I know I'm moving through this information fairly quickly. I'm just trying to give a quick background because I know we still have quite a bit to cover. So please feel free to stop and ask questions, or I'm more than happy to have a conversation offline about any of this information. A couple of so we're now on a slightly modified version of that spreadsheet. I've removed so on the full version, we also show the differences between these metrics and the Texas average to kind of give an idea of how far away these plans are. So you can see a couple, and you don't need to go to that actually, but a couple of slides up, we show the Texas average and the national average for most of these metrics. And that information is pulled from the public plans database multiple times throughout the year to get a slightly more updated number to compare against. So here, again, there's a lot of information even on this one, so it's kind of difficult to see. So that's why we pulled out some of those additional columns so we could zoom in a little bit in case we want to have some conversations about specific numbers or the plan, or Midland Fire in particular, since that's the plan that we are currently reviewing. So let me give you a basic history of the process that we follow. Like I said, these metrics were developed to help us narrow down the plans that we wanted to take a look at. So we have a number of metrics. Obviously, the more metrics that are highlighted, likely the more concern that plan would be. And so we kind of narrow that down to say 3 to 5 plans internally. Then we take those 3 to 5 plans, do some more specific research to put together more specific information to look a little bit closer, because obviously any one metric being looking for may not be an indication of an issue. So that's why we like to, one, start with more than one metric, and then two, do a little bit more digging before we settle on any plans. Frequently, we might choose 2 to 3 plans to review at any one time, but given our current abilities and the workload that we have settled on one. So as you can see, this particular spreadsheet is dated from late March. So we started our process of narrowing the plans down at that time. Midland was under consideration as one of the plans. They've also been under consideration for prior reviews, but because of their FSRP, we were trying to give them an opportunity to make some of those changes, because we had, it was our understanding at that time that they were working on changes. Obviously now we're nearly 2 years past that original due date, so those changes have not come. I'll also note that in early April, Midland Fire's name came up a couple of times during the legislative session with respect to questions about the investment performance evaluation reporting, the funding policy reporting, because we hadn't received, at that time, we had not received either a funding policy or an IPPE from them. And then we also received an email from Marcia from the board actuary, who had expressed some concerns in the past and expressed some additional concerns. And she was encouraging the staff to select Midland Fire as one of the next plans that we performed an intensive review on. So Marcia, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that email or not.
So Kenny, as we were trying to think through who to put under intensive review, again, my prior comments were, can we please focus on poorly funded plans, anything less than 50% or even 50% is still terrible. But I did focus on, I said, beside that, I would like to take a look at Midland, only because I had several reasons. When I looked into the database, it's that their funding ratios have continued to decline over time. And I realize that some of this is associated with assumption changes. Their asset base is not growing, and yet they still have a very substantial asset base. They're over $80 million. They have a very high expense ratio, higher than any of the Telfra plans. And that was from the database, the online database. At the time, they were missing their PRB 1000. They hadn't submitted the FSRP. There was no funding policy. And they hadn't submitted their investment performance plan. So, to me, that I was more concerned that there was so many missing things. We'd been told that there was progress being made at Midland, that they were working on it. But again, that's, been a couple of years. And I felt like, even though they're showing a funded percentage of 51%, I thought, I think it's time that we just kind of look at what's going on there.
Members, I just want to clarify that the purpose for this exercise is to illustrate why the staff has selected Midland for an intensive actuarial review. Kenny, can you correct me if I'm wrong here, but shown on the left-hand side of our screen, the plans that are shaded in blue, those are plans that previously have undergone an intensive review. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And so we have added Midland to that list. I also want to elaborate briefly on something that Kenny said and Marcia raised as well. That's the payroll growth rate. And their comments are spot on. Payroll growth is akin to one's personal income. If one was trying to amortize their own mortgage, you could consider payroll growth as a sort of the expected increase in your salary. And if you're assuming that your salary is going to grow faster than it actually is, then your individual burden for paying off that mortgage is going to be relatively higher. And I can tell you that most plans are not experiencing a rate of payroll growth that is commensurate with what they're assuming. The public sector has been growing much more slowly, particularly since the Great Recession. adding fewer positions. Most cities and certainly the state are adding fewer positions. In fact, right now, for example, the state of Texas is employing about the same number of employees as they were 20 years ago. And so their payroll growth has been quite slow. Payroll growth, individual wage growth of public employees has also been relatively sluggish. And so payroll growth rate really is an actuarial assumption that really needs to be examined by plans and actuaries and kept in mind by, among others, members of this board, because it's easy to inflate a payroll growth rate to present a more positive picture than may actually exist. Other comments or questions for Kenny on this intensive review for Midland?
Okay, so just so everyone is aware of the general process and where we are at this point. So obviously the plan was selected in mid to late April. We reached out via phone call to both the fund and the city. We followed those phone calls up with an email, and that was basically a notification that they'd been selected. We're making them aware that they'd been selected, and that we would be following up with information requests and asking for feedback. We also invited them to the expected time at which we would be presenting this, which originally was in September, the September board meeting, as you can see in the attached emails. That timeline has been pushed back a little bit. So basically, we sent a data request in early May. We've had multiple conversations with both the fund and the city about that request. One of the primary concerns of the fund was the potential cost, as well as the time necessary to gather the information. So the city did indicate that they'd be willing to cover any potential costs. We're currently in the process, and our expectation is hopefully a committee meeting in October or the December board meeting for presenting the final the final intensive review.
Kenny, Marcia again, can you give the board just a little bit of information on the type of information that you requested, and let us know to what extent the system has responded?
Certainly. So the data request usually consists of kind of three broad areas. We compile all the documents that are required to be provided to us to verify that all of the information we currently have on file is up to date. So we ask for verification that the summary that we have on our data center and the documents that we have on hand are up to date. We ask for some additional actuarial information if they have it. So when we do projections, we can be as accurate as possible. So generally that consists of some additional information regarding their liabilities and the duration of their liabilities, as well as projected benefit payments. And then depending on how much information we have about their investments, we ask about some additional questions to try to understand how they're invested a little bit better. In this particular case, we asked some clarifying questions specifically about their investment performance evaluation, and then we also asked for some governing documents of some of their more illiquid assets. And then as part of those two pieces, we ask if we can reach out to their consultants, so their actuary or in this case, the individual who completed the IPPE to ask clarifying questions.
Do they have an investment consultant?
So I don't believe that they have they don't have a traditional investment consultant. They do have a consultant who performed the IPPE, but his primary role, my understanding, his primary role is to provide performance and attribution analysis. And so he doesn't, a lot of investment consultants are providing more involved advice, I guess, with respect to the asset allocation and the investments that the plans are getting involved in. My understanding of this relationship is that essentially their consultant is providing research for the board themselves to make decisions. So they're providing research on individual managers that they may be interested in, or that they're currently working with, and as well as mutual fund products and that type of thing.
But this consultant would probably be doing the quarterly reports and things.
I believe he provides some quarterly performance analysis, but that was one of the things that we did request was quarterly or annual performance analysis of their portfolio, and we were told that information is not available, that they don't have overall performance analysis.
Okay, but presumably if it has been prepared by this consultant, we should be able to get something from the consultant.
Yes, I would think so. So the investment performance evaluation did include a number of charts and graphs, which I believe is similar to the research that is likely provided, but there's nothing that is a consolidated overall portfolio analysis. It's generally of each individual product or manager.
Okay, thank you.
So Kenny, thank you. Let's try to wrap this up. We expect to be seeing the results of this review at the Actuarial Committee in the fall? Or is that too soon?
Anu, do you want to answer that?
Members, this is Anumeha Kumar. We were hoping to work on the review, of course, and then come back to the Actuarial Committee to try to present the review to the full board by our scheduled September meeting. However, because of the delay related to our information request, our timeline has been pushed back. We have received some partial information from the system. So with regards to our actuarial request, they have responded and provided the projections that we requested. However, with the investment related information that we requested, it was our understanding that the city was going to try to enter into an agreement with the system to pay for, like Kenny mentioned, any reasonable cost associated with producing the investment related request that we made, like the quarterly performance reports and some additional governance documents. However, we don't know what the status of where that agreement stands. And we don't have a clear timeline on if or when we would be able to receive the additional information on the investment side that we are waiting on. We did reach out, Kenny, correct me if I'm wrong. Did we reach out to the investment consultant? That's one option, right? That given the fund is small, we want to be considerate that there could potentially be some effort, time, and expense, hopefully not involved in putting the rest of the information together. So we want to be mindful of that. We want to be able to work with the system and give them appropriate amount of time. And one option, because of which I believe the city had agreed to step up and enter into this agreement with the system, was if the consultant were to provide the information to us. However, the system has asked us to not contact their consultants.
So I have a quick question. So let's make sure I understand here, because I'm confused a little bit. So is there not a quarterly report produced or a monthly report produced either by consultant, internally, or even the custody bank, which is very common for the bank to even produce a report? And if not, how is the committee, who is acting as a fiduciary, monitoring on a quarterly basis or with some sort of cadence the performance of the report, the performance of the portfolio they're building out? Yeah, I'm confused as to how they're even doing their work.
So
there's not a report.
That's and there's more of this is included behind the investment practices and performance agenda item that we're going to be discussing in a little bit. But one of the questions that we raised and that we did ask in our data request was for either quarterly or annual performance reports that are used by the investment committee or the board to perform their investment analysis. And the response that we received was that that information is not available.
It's not available, or okay. Okay.
Not it was not available was what we were told.
So I have two questions. I think one will be for Kenny and then one maybe for Melissa. But Kenny, the agreement that Anu had alluded to between the city and the fund, where the city would pay the cost to produce any reports that would be required for them to be responsive. I mean, do we have, assuming that an agreement is eventually reached between these two entities, do we have kind of an estimated time for how long we think it would take for those reports to be generated?
I can jump in here, Stephanie. It was our understanding that the city was possibly looking at providing us, if the agreement was executed, to try to provide us the information, I believe, within 30 days or so. But we can certainly follow up and we can keep the board posted on what that timeline is going to look like.
Okay. And then you all said that this process kind of started in early May. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then this next question, may just be for Melissa, or Anu, but if we kind of get into this cycle of non-responsiveness related to these requests, what options, does the board or the agency have to kind of, I guess, what other avenues do we have to seek some of this information other than just simply asking for it?
Well, Melissa Juarez here with the Attorney General's office. Your statute in the Government Code, Chapter 801, gives the board the authority to investigate records of public retirement systems. So by statute, you are authorized to do that. And your agency does that on a regular basis with other retirement systems. And generally speaking, those reports and information are provided voluntarily. But if they're not, another option the board has by statute under section 801.205 of the Government Code is to for the board to issue a subpoena to any witness for any documents that the board needs in order to do its job. So that would be another option that the board would have. And those subpoenas are enforceable in court.
And then would we have the ability to subpoena, I guess, both the system and the consultants, or is it any entity that would have records related to the system, or is it just the system itself?
Anybody who would be a witness.
Okay.
The statute does not limit it to only a retirement system, but rather authorizes the board to subpoena witnesses.
Okay. And then kind of a follow-up question to that, short of subpoena, do we have, any other alternatives? Like, is the fund itself subject to Public Information Act? And if yes, could we submit a public information request for this information and kind of have that request follow the traditional PIA timelines for responsiveness?
That's an interesting question, and that may be a possibility. I can look further into specifically how that would be accomplished, but that may be an option.
Okay.
Sort of going the subpoena route. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Speaking for myself, I think, to the extent that we have someone who is, being responsive, I'm fine with, kind of asking politely for information, but I also kind of recognize that, there would come a point in time where, we may have to ask in a different manner. I definitely would want to continue down the path of asking in the least formal way possible, but I also think that, we need to maybe see some progress that they are being responsive. And I don't know if it's fair or not, and I don't know if other board members kind of share my sentiment, but this is a fund that's, is coming up on 2 years for its FSRP due date. And I don't want this intensive review to kind of drag out on a similar time frame, such that, there's this promise that information is forthcoming, but it never really materializes. And so my preference, kind of would be to maybe look at for the board staff to, kind of continuously monitor this and keep the board updated as to how and when these information requests both are sent and come back. And then if we kind of come into this cycle of non-responsiveness, I think we should, be willing to consider all of our options, even if that means that we have to have, some type of interim board meeting before this fall, so that we can direct staff and or Melissa to undertake more formal actions, so that we're not waiting until our, fall meeting this year for the staff simply to report that they haven't received any information, and we're kind of, 4 or 5 months down the line from where we are today.
Madam Chair, this is Keith Brainerd. I agree with all of your comments, and I would encourage staff, as you are corresponding with the folks in Midland, to set reasonable deadlines and make clear our expectations for receiving information back. As far as I can tell, everything we're asking for has been completely reasonable and ought to be something they ought to be able to produce on demand. Other comments or questions to this issue? Ms. Juarez, thank you. We appreciate your input on this. Is there anything else we need to address on this issue right now, Anu?
Thank you, members. No, I think this should conclude our discussion regarding Midland Fire's intensive review, Kenny, and we will make sure to keep the board up to date on where we are at with the information request.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, that concludes the report of the Actuarial Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I will call on board member Zook to walk us through action items related to the investment committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So from here, we're going to talk about the investment practices and performance evaluations received as required by Government Code Section 802.109, including the compliance with those. So I'd like to call on Robert Munter and Kenny together to provide the report on this and the subsequent item, which is just to get it out there. The preliminary investment expense reporting is required by Government Code 802.103A3, mouthful, and Chapter 609 of the Texas Administrative Code, all the statutes that relate to the required reporting by plans on regular intervals. So Robert and Kenny, the floor is yours.
This is Kenny Herbold again, staff actuary. I'm almost done, and I'll give you a break so someone else can talk here shortly. But I'm going to lead off on the investment practices and performance evaluations. We had, so if you recall, we compiled the majority of them last summer and submitted an investment performance report. We presented an investment performance report to the board at our November board meeting and submitted that to the legislature last year. There were 2 plans that we had expected an IPPE from, that we had not received one from. Nacogdoches County Hospital is one. Brian talked a little bit about them during the annual reporting compliance information earlier. Again, they have been struggling with getting their reporting requirements completed. When I had conversation with them specifically about the IPPE, They were concerned, they were having some staffing issues because of COVID, and were concerned from that end. And they were also having difficulty finding a consultant to perform the analysis. We did provide them with a list of all of the firms who had completed one here in Texas, and we directed them to Texpers as well, who we believe was compiling a list of potential firms, not just firms that had completed them. So my understanding is that they completed their audits, the 2018-2019 audits, and moving towards their 2020 audit, as well as towards their IPPE as well. So we're not entirely sure of what timeline this particular requirement is on, but presumably it is coming at some point. The other one was Midland Fire. We did receive a copy of that this past April. And so if you recall, last summer when we were compiling all of the initial IPPEs, the investment committee had directed us to reach out to certain plans where we had noted that the IPPE contained few or no recommendations. And that wasn't the only issue. It was if they contained few or no recommendations, but also did not include an analysis explaining how those conclusions were drawn, so why no recommendations were needed. The investment committee asked us to reach out to those plans and express some concern and request some additional analysis be included in the IPPE. So we felt that Midland Fire fell into that category. So we were following a similar process as we did last year, where we have a conversation with the fund as well as their consultant about what those concerns are. Given the conversations we had related to the intensive review, as well as some follow-up questions we were attempting to ask on the PRB 1000, that's when we were told that we were not supposed to, we could not speak directly with their investment consultant who performed the evaluation. Because we couldn't have that conversation, we drafted an email which we generally sent as a follow-up to that conversation along to the systems that we spoke to that expressed the general concerns. And during that conversation, those conversations, we would generally be able to talk a little bit more about the specific concerns within the IPPE itself. And so as part of that, we drafted an additional attachment that was included. Both of those documents are in the packet. And so it includes the description of the primary concerns, some examples of other IPPEs that did exhibit the types of analysis that the investment committee and the board were interested in seeing. And then we did a slightly more specific attachment that kind of outlined some of the concerns that we had with respect to both the performance evaluation itself, as well as, because we're in the process of the intensive review, some of the actual practices of the Midland Fire board as well. So all of that is included for you all to see the information that's been communicated.
All right, so as we talk about the Midland specifics, so there's a lot of things that we were hoping for and that we are expecting to receive that we did not receive. And we're not allowed to talk to the consultant to ask those questions. And so we have submitted a request to the plan and to the city, I assume, for updated information. And I just want to be sure that I'm hearing what Anu, you said earlier, that the city has agreed to pay for, or is in the process of hopefully reaching, the agreement with the plan to pay for a different review to be done in this particular situation. Is that a good summary?
So not a different review. It's our understanding to pay for any reasonable cost associated with us asking questions regarding their IPPE or regarding the investment program of the consultant who performed the IPPE for the system.
Okay, and so just so I have a feel, what is the normal cost associated with somebody producing these IPPEs? I mean, what's the range of cost? I mean, obviously TRS at $150 billion, that, I'm not asking about that, but for, this is an $85 million, $84 million plan. for that size of a plan, what's kind of normal and customary? Kenny, what did y'all see throughout the process?
So the what was generally spent was probably between $5,000 and $20,000. It wasn't necessarily included in the IPPEs themselves, but from informal polling of plans and conversations, the smaller plans would generally spend between $5,000 and $20,000 is our understanding.
Okay. So if you'll jump, Ashley, to page 70 of the packet, I'd appreciate it, because I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly here. Different page number than what I'm looking at. Go one up, if you would, please. No, one down then. Sorry. Okay, so the way I read this is that this consultant obviously was engaged by the system to do this, and full disclosure is at the bottom that they charged $500 to do this report. Is that the way I read that, and is that correct?
That is our understanding, yes.
Okay, so an $84 million plan spent $500 in order to comply with state law. That's the way I read that, and certainly I know that they do a lot of other work, but one of the things that was talked about in the last session is that we can't get the quarterly performance reporting that is referenced in this. We have not seen that. We have not been given that. Is that correct?
That's correct. So my understanding from conversations with the fund and earlier conversations with the consultant is that the quarterly performance reporting that is being referenced here is specifically on individual managers and individual products. So the question, and it could be that it was the structure of our question, but this is where some of the difficulty with not being able to have an actual conversation and trying to go back and forth via email maybe is causing some inefficiencies and some more difficulty. But the structure of our question in our data request was copies of performance reports used to evaluate. We may have used the word overall portfolio performance, but the performance reports that were used by the investment committee and the board to evaluate the performance. We have also, and so the information that's included in the IPPE. So if you look at the, so obviously the information that's in the packet is just an excerpt. We included tabs 2 and 3, but there is also an outline which lists all of the items that were included in the IPPE. All of that information is available on our website, and that is, it primarily appears to be performance reporting from inception of each of these investments. It's not entirely clear. There's some of the information we'd like to gain clarity on. And so again, that's why not being able to speak directly and have these conversations is causing more questions. So the answers that we are getting are simply raising more questions that we're trying to get, because there's inconsistencies in how the information is either reported in the IPPE when we compare it to the annual financial report, or there's inconsistencies internally within the IPPE that we're not entirely understanding why those are occurring. So we've expressed some of that information in the letter specifically about the IPPE. And so it's important to recognize, I think, that there's two separate documents. We have a data request for the intensive review, which asks some clarifying questions that came out of information from the IPPE, and asks for some additional documents, like governing documents for their alternative investments, so we can get a better sense of how those fees are structured and how the evaluation methodology is supposed to be, how the assets are supposed to be valued, that kind of thing. And then there are the concerns that we raise specific to the investment performance evaluation itself. And so there's two different documents that are floating out there, and the concerns that the document that is specific to the IPPE was not an information request per se. It was simply a document that said, these are the concerns that were raised by the board. Here are some specific concerns that we see that we want to include. And with respect to the IPPE, we're not opining on whether they've completed their statutory requirement or not. We are just expressing some concerns, some things that we would have expected to see analyzed within the evaluation, or things that weren't discussed that we thought the IPPE could be improved by elaborating on certain things.
Sure, and we talked about this last year, but this is obviously the first time that a lot of these plans have gone through this process, and so we know that there's going to be some learning curve as to what is expected in order to be compliant with statute, what the definition of some of these things are, et cetera. And so we fully expect to have to, as we have with so many of the other plans, go back and request additional information, and they've been very compliant with that and very helpful. And so just for the benefit of the rest of the board, what I want to summarize here is effectively all we're asking for at this time is the information that we believe they need to provide in order to be compliant with state law, and then effectively the documentation that they use in order to manage their assets and their plan. Is that a good summary?
Yes.
Okay. And so right now we're not getting that. And so not to rehash what we talked about in the previous session, but we're asking very nicely, just please, give us the transparency to what it is that you use to make decisions and the reporting that you receive from your consultant. And then here are some suggestions of how we really feel like, you need to modify the IPPE in order to be compliant with state law. So what we're hoping, obviously, is that, the plan and the city will provide us with that information in a timely fashion, which we know that they're using every quarter when they have their board meetings to evaluate their own plan. I'm assuming they're quarterly. And that way we can, have the intensive done at the same time that we also feel like we have a fully compliant IPPE. Again, is that a fair summary?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, good. All right,
Just
go ahead,
quick,
please.
Sorry, Marcia, please go aheher
Just from an actuary's point of view, I just want to maybe remind the board that there is $84 million thereabouts in this fund, that members, firefighters are contributing 14.2% of their pay to this fund, and the municipality Midland is contributing 22.2% of pay. So, from a member's, I take response, I'm really looking at, trying to protect the members, make sure that their benefits can be paid when they're due. And the fact that these people are not covered by Social Security means that they are totally dependent on this pension plan. And when you're taking, over 14% of pay out of somebody's paycheck, I am just worried about making sure that benefits will be paid when benefits are due. And again, 22% of pay being contributed by the municipality is a very substantial amount as well. And so to me, there's just a lot of responsibility here about managing this money.
So, Marcia, it's a wonderful point. And one of the things that I wanted to go back to in the packet, we don't have to flip there, Ashley, but I just went back on my other screen here to look at it. But so, right now we have 36% of payroll being contributed between the combination of the employees and the city itself. And yet we still have right now a projection, according to the actuarial assumptions, that this fund is going to run out of money into 2043, which is 22 years from now, which means those people that are contributing capital today, if something does not dramatically change in the way that the actuarial, reality happens, the reality of returns and funding, et cetera, in 22 years from now, it's going to be out of money. That's a very discouraging thing. And so I hope that everybody understands that's what we're focused on. And we're just trying to be able to protect the employees and the retirees as much as we possibly can, which is the role of this body. So thank you for that. Anu, you had a comment?
Thank you. I just had a quick clarification regarding the fee charged by the consultant. We did hear from other systems last year, the ones that used their existing consultant, that those consultants, of course, did not charge any additional fees of those for those IPPEs. So I just wanted to make sure in all transparency that that information's out there as well.
Sure, and that's fair. I mean, obviously, if somebody is being paid really, really well by a plan already, it's reasonable to ask them to do an IPPE in addition to that, just as a value add, because it doesn't have to be done that frequently. You know, we talked about at the investment committee, you know, best practices would be, in our opinion, and I know this is a little bit harder for the smaller plans, and so we're very sensitive to this, but having someone grade their own homework is sometimes not the best solution. In a perfect world, it is best practice to have an independent third party effectively grade the homework of the consultant and of how the plan is performing and just conducting their daily routine of managing the assets, et cetera. So totally understand how some want to have their existing consultant do it, but just know that it causes a conflict of interest that is, if it's avoidable, we'd really rather do that. And then, of course, in that particular instance, our ability to communicate directly with that consultant helps us be able to get comfortable with that conflict of interest and how it is not, obviously impacted the way that they have drafted, the IPPE. So thank you for that clarification and just some comments on kind of best practices as we all learn about this new statutory requirement that all plans are subject to. Any other comments on that? I want to dig into the report just a little bit, Kenny.
Sure.
Go ahead, Christopher.
Sure. I just have a couple questions. Just for the sake of being new, a couple questions I want to clarify about this plan and in general. So the trustees or the investment committee of the Midland Fire plan and all plans that we cover in the group of 99 are fiduciaries, correct? So they have a standard of care to the participants, and okay. And then secondly, it's my understanding, and I'm still kind of going through training with Anu and her team, but there's training that all of the fiduciaries are required to go through as part of PRB reporting, correct?
Correct.
Have the Midland Fire trustees gone through that training, and does it include investment basics about reporting and monitoring and their responsibility as a fiduciary?
I can speak to the second part, that yes, it does include investment training. We do have a series of courses that everyone can take that meets the basic education requirements. I cannot personally speak to the compliance. Someone else might be able to jump on. It's my understanding that they have most likely met all of their requirements. I know that the board, like their plan administrator was at the most recent taxpayers conference, and several of their board members attend the local conferences and that as well. So it's my understanding that they've met all of the education requirements, but I don't know for certain.
We can certainly quickly double check that for you, Mr. Gonzalez, and follow up on that here in a second.
Okay, and then my last is a question, but it's also a comment. In their annual reporting, do they display consolidated performance reporting for their investment portfolio, which I think is a standard item in annual reporting? So their annual document should have consolidated investment performance for the fiscal year, and then it should also be broken down by 3-year, 5-year, et cetera.
The accounting requirements, I believe, include a 1-year return calculation, and they show the income, the dollar incomes. I'm not familiar with reporting requirements that beyond that. They do break some of it down. I know if you're more familiar with.
Our PRB 1000, of course, does require the 3-year,
right, so
10 years. So you're right.
Yeah, we do have a form it's consolidated reporting, but that's the one that we are currently having difficulty getting for 2019.
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
Michelle Downey Cranes, can you hear me? Because I have the MET compliance information. So as of our last training compliance report to the legislature. We do that every 2 years. That was just done this past November. Midland Fire was 75% compliant with their minimum trustee training requirements. And so they had 3 members compliant, 2 in progress, which do not count towards compliance, and 2 that were not compliant with training. And their system administrator was compliant.
And just one follow-up then. Thank you for that response. So the training, does it include also the responsibilities that they have to the PRB as far as reporting goes, and even suggestions or samples about how to get to those answers
It does.
to
Thank
deliver
you for-
reporting? Okay.
Yes, thank you for the question. We cover state and some federal required reporting. And just to, as a quick summary, the training requirements are 7 hours within the first year for new trustees, and then 4 hours every 2 years going forward. So the statistic I gave you of 75% compliant reflects wherever they are in their training cycle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so any other comments before we dig into the report itself just a little bit? We're not going to go deep in this, but I have a couple of specific questions. Okay, so Kenny, as you reviewed the report that was submitted, what's the asset allocation look like? I mean, where are the assets now, held, if you will?
Sure, and as I mentioned earlier, we did have some difficulty getting a clear picture because we had some difficulty tying the information that was reported in the IPPE back to the annual financial report. So there were some discrepancies or some difficulties digging in to get exactly what they're invested in. But as far as we can tell, they do have a fairly large allocation to both alternative assets and real estate, and larger than most plans that we typically see. And that's right now, it's about 26% in total to both real assets, and I think if I recall, it's about 20% in real assets, and then 15 or 16 to alternative assets. And of all of those, they have a very large portion. It appears to be extremely illiquid as well. So it seems like probably at least 20 to 30% of their total assets are in illiquid investments. And then even the more traditional asset classes, like the fixed income, that appears to be pretty heavily tilted towards the riskier side. So their fixed income investments are primarily or almost exclusively invested in high yield or international fixed income funds.
Got it. And I don't really want to get into too much of evaluating whether those are good or bad decisions. That's not our place. And as somebody who my entire investment practice in our business is alternative investments. So I feel really comfortable with where those fit in an overall portfolio and how they can add value and how they can detract value and where they add risk and hopefully reduce risk. But one of the things that is imperative when talking about these less liquid assets or illiquid assets is how they're being valued, how frequently they're being valued. What information have they given us to understand how they go about valuing those, how frequently they're valued, who values them, and how they're reported on as part of their consolidated, performance reporting?
The short answer is we don't actually know. That is one of the items that is specifically identified in statute that's supposed to be covered in the IPPE, but the IPPE didn't actually speak to the valuation methodologies or the frequency that the alternative or illiquid assets.
Okay, that's not good. We need to have that information in order to be able to evaluate, and we know that the board is using that, and nobody's questioning whether or not the board is using that and doing their very best job that they can. But at the same time, we've got to comply with statute, and obviously we're in the middle of trying to understand a plan that's going to run out of money in 22 years unless something changes. So we need to get answers on those items. Again, not second guessing investment decisions. I mean, investment decisions are incredibly difficult and everybody's going to be wrong sometimes. So that's not the purpose of our review. the purpose of our review is to understand that there's good policies, good practices, as Christopher Gonzalez mentioned, just good best practices to make the best decisions that we possibly can at the time, that we're making them, and that's just good transparency and oversight. So we'll continue that dialogue, obviously, as we go through the intensive and hopefully get a revised IPPE with the help of the plan and obviously of the city. What else do we need to talk about in this section before we go into some of the charts, et cetera?
Chris, this is Marcia again. I just have a question for you or for Kenny. And I know, subject in Texas, we are subject to open meeting laws, things like that. Are the plans subject to the same open meeting laws, and would there be like minutes of their deliberations on investments that we could see? I mean, is that, I don't know if the same rules apply at the system level as apply to us.
So Anu is nodding yes, and so I believe the answer is yes. If you go to their website, they do have all of their agendas posted. They have minutes from, as far as I can tell, from all of their board meetings posted. It does not appear that they have minutes from all of their investment committee meetings posted. However, the minutes are relatively sparse, I guess is the best word. There is some discussion or some explanation, but compared to the way in which we take minutes, right, there's a lot more detail in the minutes that we keep than most of the pension boards, as far as I've seen.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this specific IPPE before we talk to more general topics here? All right, so I'll summarize on that. So we just need to get good information so that we know that good information is being used, and we really, really appreciate the support of the plan and of the city to help us in that regard. So Kenny, do you have anything else to report on, or are we going to pass the ball?
I have nothing else to report on, and I'm more than happy to pass it to Robert to take the next agenda item.
Robert? Robert, take it away.
All right, thank you, members. So hello, my name is Robert Munter. I'm the investment analyst with the Texas Pension Review Board. I'll be covering the new investment expense reporting requirement and our preliminary work at displaying the new data that we are receiving from this requirement. And if we can go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so real quick, members, just as a recap here for you and then for any systems or members of the public that are watching, the investment expense reporting requirement here is a completely new requirement for many systems. While some of the larger systems were already reporting similar information such as TRS, TCDRS, and TMRS, just to name a few. Additionally, last year, the board adopted rules that went into effective March 15th for the new requirement. And there are 4 key points that we would just want to touch on here for the new requirement for systems, just to provide some additional information and their annual financial report. And from this new requirement, these 4 things that we're going to touch on here is just, it's including that they need to include in that annual financial report a listing of the names of investment managers engaged by the retirement system, listing by asset class of all direct and indirect commissions and fees paid by the retirement system during the fiscal year. And then 3, a listing by service provided of investment services. And then finally, this information must be included in their annual financial report, and it cannot be reported separately. And this does not mean that the information is required to be audited or should require any additional cost to the system to include it in the supplemental section of the report. And if go ahead and go to the next slide. So just as a recap of the timeline, last year in March, after our rules were adopted, The PRB notified systems of the new requirement and the annual financial reporting dates that would be affected by this new requirement. And then this year in March, we knew that with this being a new requirement, many systems might have questions while working on their annual audits regarding the rules or how to be in compliance. And as part of our efforts, we created an email, which is included in the packet after these slides on, should be page 105, that provides some general points to ensure compliance. And additionally, in March, we began directly reaching out to the systems to help them understand and answer any questions that they might have. And we primarily focused on the TELFRA and ATAN systems. And at this time, we have contacted 61 systems, with 5 systems that we attempted to speak to, but weren't able to get a hold of. So we left messages and provided our email there that I mentioned before, just to try to help make sure that they understand the new requirement and let them know that if they have any questions that they can always contact us, and we're here to help them out. And for the systems though that we did speak to, the systems have been thankful for our efforts and reaching out to them and providing that email that helps simplify the rules into a few key points. And then additionally, there are 3 examples of answers to questions that we have received, and we'll be working on compiling further questions and answers to further assist systems with this new requirement. And the 3 examples that I have include the first one, which is just that the definition for investment services are systems fees for general purposes of administering its investment program, such as custodial, investment consulting, investment related legal services and research. 2, all values must be reported as a dollar amount and expense ratio is not sufficient. And then 3, fees should be reported when they are accrued, not when they are paid. And then finally, as you will see with our table, because of when the new requirement went into effect, fiscal year 2021 will be the first year that we get data from all of our systems. And that won't be until the second half of next year when we receive these reports. Okay, and then next slide. So because of how new this reporting requirement is, staff has been working on preliminary graphs that will display this information. And we will be working with the investment committee to refine these graphs. And we do not expect to publish any of these graphs to our online data center until the end of the year at the earliest. And we want to use this time to focus on developing these graphs, receiving feedback from systems and our investment committee, as our focus is ensuring that this new data is shown in a useful way and sufficient context is provided when displaying the new information. And these preliminary graphs are also only displaying 1 year's worth of data. Further graphs will be developed when we have multiple years worth of data. And so just to summarize, going forward, what we're looking to do is to 1, improve and finalize these graphs to begin displaying this new data on our data center. 2, standardize the data for presenting to the board in our meetings. And 3, use the data to develop benchmarking or other new useful reports or analysis. And we can go to the next slide. And so when we start going through these slides here, if at any point you have questions, feel free to stop me and I'll be happy to answer any that you have. And I'll pause at the end before we go to the next type of slides. But first, the first graph that we will discuss will be found on our individual plan section of our data center, which displays specific system information. The 3 new graphs will be located between our direct expense graph, which are already reported expenses required under GASB, and our investment return and asset allocation graphs. So on the right, you'll see the 3 graphs that we already are providing on our data center, and then where that new location will be where we'll add these new graphs. And the 3 new graphs will display the new required data, which is that by asset class, fee type, and service provided. And if we go to the next slide, it'll provide the first preliminary graph that we're working on. And so the first graph is an example of displaying the information as a graph of fees by asset class. We have highlighted some new interactivity that we have with these graphs, which will make it a lot easier to explore our data on our data center. And the two interactive examples that I just want to call out here real quick for the graph is in the top left is a tab feature, which is for multiple graphs in one frame that you can select between. And then the second one is a hover tool to display more information from the graph when hovering over, as an example, these stack bars. And if we go to the next slide, will be the graph that's essentially using the same data as the previous slide, but just displayed differently. So this is the investment fees by fee type. And this is just an example of how we can use that tab feature for showing one set of data in multiple ways, just displayed slightly differently. And if we go to the next slide here, this will be the final individual graph that we will have, which will focus on the investment services data that we receive from systems. And so I'm just gonna real quickly pause here because this will be the last one for the individual. So any questions regarding these before we move on to the next type of graphs? Okay. All right, well then we can continue on to the next slide. So for the next ones, this will be for the comparative section of our data center, which groups systems into various peer groups. We will again position our new graph after our expense graph here, and also above the net investment return, just for, again, providing that context. And for right now, we are only looking to include one new graph, which would be investment fees stacked by fee type. And if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to show sort of just an example of what we're thinking. So this graph will focus on the investment fee stacked by fee type. This graph will also have a total Texas average line included, which will be similar to what we do in our other expense graph already, right, to provide that context. And then additionally, that hover tool interactivity that I mentioned earlier will make these type of graphs a lot easier on our data center to explore the stacked bars and view that data. But this would be the one graph that we're focused on for adding just for the comparative section. So then any questions regarding this graph here or for the comparative section of our data center? All right. Well, okay, then we can go on to the next slide. And so this will be our final new graph that we're looking to add, which will be placed at the bottom part of our aggregate page of our data center. And this new graph will be the most interactive and unique graph that we're going to be looking to add at this time. And this graph will focus on displaying the relationship between investment expenses versus investment returns. So first,
Robert,
we have a slide here. Oh,
Robert, I'm going to interject something that just having somebody who really enjoys looking at things like this as part of what I do, but two, y'all have done such a tremendous job with this. Just for the benefit of the rest of the board, there's a tremendous focus these days on fees, as they should be, because of the fact that fees can be a massive impact on returns, not only when interest rates are high, but especially when interest rates are low, because paying 50 basis points to make a 7% rate of return is a heck of a lot different than paying 50 basis points to make a 3% rate of return. And so what this particular chart is, and we'll probably talk about it more when it's finalized and there's some tweaks probably still left to it, is what we refer to as just a scattergram to, in a very quick picture, see how somebody's doing. It's okay to have low returns and low fees. It's really good to have higher returns in any way, but it's okay to pay higher fees to get higher returns. It's really a bad idea to pay high fees to get low returns, which is the bottom right quadrant. And then the top left, of course, is where everybody wants to be, which is pay the lowest fees possible and get the highest return possible. So we call that God's country. So that's ultimately, and you've probably seen similar things to where you look at volatility in return. That is what the team is trying to show here. Is it's relative to the return as to the fees that are there. And if something's generating fantastic returns and it's expensive, that's okay. But it dang sure better perform if it's going to be expensive. So that's what we tried to do here. And obviously, as the members of the board have other suggestions on how it can be improved between now and the time that it goes live, obviously we would welcome those. And so, Robert, I'll pass the ball back to you, but I just wanted to explain a little bit of something that looks really complicated, but it's actually really simple.
Hey, Chris, this is Marcia. Before we get back to Robert, again, not trying to make life too difficult, but back in April in the Austin American Statesman, there was an article authored by Scott Burns, and he was talking about the high investment fees in the teacher's defined contribution plan. I know that, we have focused on defined benefit plans and that we really have limited oversight responsibility with respect to DC plans, but should we consider at some point adding an investigation of investment fees with respect to DC plans in the state?
I'm going to punt that one to Anu and staff because I don't know where our mandate begins and ends, so I'll defer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Zook. Ms. Dash, so with regards to defined contribution plan, like you mentioned, they're not required to report any of that information to the PRB. Our mandate was streamlined when we went through the last sunset review process to focus solely on defined benefit plans. So at this time, because of the mandate that's been given to us by the legislature and the fact that our role with regards to defined contribution plan is limited in the sense we can still, of course, receive any potential complaints regarding defined contribution plans offered here in the state of Texas. Other than that, our role is very, very limited. However, we can always consider potentially conducting a survey. Of course, that would have to be voluntary in nature and survey the DC plans to gather more information if that's what the board would like us to do. So that's something we could look into.
Robert,
Thank you.
Thank you, Anu. Robert, I'll punt it back to you.
All right, great. Thank you. And thank you for the comments there. So yes, I do absolutely love this type of graph and what we're showing here. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So it's still the same graph, but we've again highlighted a couple of important features here that I just want to bring some attention to about what we're trying to do with this graph. And just a brief overview of it. So the systems here, the dots on the scatter plot, they are colored based on their asset size peer group, which is shown in the legend. And what we have is some interactivity there for the legend to where you can essentially toggle whether or not that peer group is actually visible. So as an example, you could get it to where there's only, if you just wanted to look at the peer group of systems that have 100 million plus in assets or any other combination that you want to look at off that peer group for the asset sizes, you could look at just those and see where they lie on this investment returns and expense graph. And then additionally, the two graphs that are on the sides, the graph on the right displaying the distribution of the investment returns, and then the bottom graph displaying the distribution of the investment or the total expenses here. Just helps visually make it a lot easier to understand, right? Not only just looking at the scatter plot, but seeing where and what the distributions are for those two important pieces there. But with that, that would be the last bit here for this particular aggregate graph that would be looking to include. So any other questions about this that I can answer? Take just a quick second here.
No, I'll make the comment now instead of later. And so for all the plan sponsors, involved and all the trustees, what I hope that you're seeing, what we're trying to do is to be able to provide you with tremendous information that will help you as you manage your plan. And, to be able to look and see exactly how it compares to everybody else your size, how they're doing, what their fees levels are, just, good best practices as well as all of, obviously all of the other graphs. And that's what we're trying to do, is to give you great information at your fingertips at no cost to you whatsoever. Don't have to pay a consultant to do any of this. Literally, it's right there and it's available for you anytime you want, once these are fully built out and once we get all the reports from everybody, obviously on the website. So
Yeah, and if I could, Mr. Zook, I totally echo that. As a practitioner, this is extremely valuable information that I think any portfolio manager for any one of these pension plans would love to have and should use as a gauge. It's always best practice to try to negotiate the best fee you can get in any given portfolio. So I think this is great.
Chris, this is Marcia again. You know, the one thing that's missing, and I think is still quite immature in the ability to display it, is really returns displayed by level of risk based on the asset allocation. And
so, yeah, it's a great point. And Robert and Kenny, y'all can chime in on this. But one of the biggest challenges we have, of course, is that most of these plans do not report to us quarterly numbers or monthly numbers. You know, they report to us very, sporadic numbers. So calculating a standard deviation on annual returns is certainly better than nothing if we have enough data to go off of. But it is somewhat limited by the amount of information that we receive. Now, all of these plans, every single one of these plans should be getting that information from their consultant. Every consultant can generate a scattergram that just shows where they are, on the efficient frontier and where they are compared to, peer groups and other risk assets, et cetera. But so, I'm not sure what we can do in that regard. But welcome any suggestions, and if we can for sure. If we can't, obviously we'll reply in that manner.
No, yeah, absolutely, and I agree. I would like to, if there's ways that we can get more of that risk information to provide that context, because that's, I think, the biggest thing, right? Understanding the fees, but also what risk levels are they looking at, but also, right, then there's some complications with, and part of the considerations here that the net returns that we're going to be looking to display is that part of the systems have different fiscal year ends, and how that sort of complicates a little bit of how you start looking at them. But right, this here is going to be just one piece of helping them see one aspect of their system and how they're performing.
And one of the things I'll add is that, for all the consultants that are on with us, all the plan sponsors, all the plan trustees, in the IPPE, providing the scattergram that shows the risk-adjusted return of the portfolio over time is a fantastic tool, not only for the rest of your board and trustees, but obviously for us to be able to understand, the professionalism that's being brought to the management of these assets on behalf of these individuals that are counting on it, as Marcia put, because they don't have anything else to live off of for the most part, because they're not in the Social Security program. So, we'd love to see that in the IPPEs. It's not required by state law, but it just would show and evidence a tremendous amount of thought and care with the management of these assets. Okay, Robert.
Cool. Okay. Well, we can go ahead and go to the next slide, which will be just real quick here. So finally, we just have a real quick overview of some various improvements that we are working on or considering with these new graphs. And again, right, getting these out here, the main thing that we want to do is just look for any additional suggestions or comments, as they're welcome, where we always accept that feedback and as we continue to develop these new graphs. But that would conclude my section here for this part. So unless there's any additional questions or comments, I'll be happy to answer or take them down now.
Other questions for Robert or Kenny or for the investment committee?
Mr. Chairman, this is Keith Brainerd. I just want to commend the staff on their progress on this. I think this is a tremendous first step. I suspect that over time, as we get more information, as we get more years under our belt, these graphs will be refined and perfected. But as you say, this is really a terrific start for the plans and the consultants, and appreciate their work. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Just a quick note here. Kenny and Robert have put in a lot of work on these graphs. Again, they are in preliminary stages, but I just wanted to make sure y'all are aware. These are skills, of course, we did not have on our staff before. And we are very proud of course, the new mandate that the legislature has handed us. So we want to make sure that we are as helpful to the systems as possible. And then putting the new information, the new enhanced investment expense data in a more user-friendly format and make it available through our data center is something that Kenny and Robert are taking very seriously, taking it to the next level. And we appreciate y'all's input and guidance. And of course, we would want to work with the systems too as we go through this process.
That's great. Well, that concludes the report of the investment committee. I'll pass it back to the chair. Who's still on mute?
Sorry, thank you for that. So right now we're going to take a brief, just 5-minute recess since we're approaching kind of the 2.5-hour mark and we still have, quite a little bit of agenda to work through. So the time is now 12:30 and we will reconvene this meeting around 12:35. Okay, the time is now 12:37, and we're going to reconvene this meeting of the Texas Pension Review Board. I am going to take a couple of the next agenda items out of order. So next we are going to move to agenda item number 9, which is amendment of board bylaws, including changes to the standing committees of the board. So in everyone's agenda package, there are proposed bylaw changes, and we do have some changes to, which committees of the board would be considered standing committees. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the changes to the board bylaws, including the changes to the standing committee assignments, pending final approval by our Assistant Attorney General Counsel.
Madam Chair, very quickly here, the bylaws that we have included in the packet, of course, has the changes tracked, and the staff is essentially proposing to replace the current legislative committee with the investment committee as a standing committee of the board. The investment committee, as it currently stands, was created as a special committee back in February of 2020. And given the ongoing work with regards to the investment performance evaluation, staff is recommending to make that change to establish the investment committee as one of the standing committees. And then there are some other cleanup changes that we are also recommending.
Stephanie, are you looking for a motion?
I am looking for a motion.
So moved. I move that we adopt the changes to the bylaws. This is Marcia Dush.
Thank you. Is there a second?
This is Keith Brainerd. I'll second.
Okay, motion has been made by Mrs. Dush and seconded by Mr. Brainerd to approve the changes to the board bylaws, including changes to the standing committees of the board. Is there any discussion from the board or any corrections to the bylaws as circulated? Okay, hearing none, we do have a motion that has been made by Mrs. Dush and seconded by Mr. Brainerd to approve the changes to the board bylaws, including changes to the standing committees of the board. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Kind of following through for committee assignments for the upcoming year. The following, we'll have the following committees, and board members will serve on the committees as follows. So for the Actuarial Committee, we'll have no changes to those board assignments. Keith Brainerd will chair that board, and then Marcia Dush and myself will serve as members of that committee. On the Investment Committee, that committee will be chaired by Christopher Zook, and Christopher Gonzalez and Rob Reese will also serve on that committee. The Educational Committee, or the Education Committee, will be chaired by Marcia Dush, and Rosie Farina Strauss and Rob Reese will serve on that committee. The Administrative Committee, there'll be no changes to that committee. I, Stephanie Libby, will be the chair of that committee, and Keith Brainerd and Rosie Farina Strauss will serve on that committee along with me. I think next we will move, I know, do you want to move to the legislative session update?
I believe the MET.
The MET, okay. So we'll move to agenda item number 7, which is Education and Research Committee, that we will rename eventually the Education Committee. And for that agenda item, I will turn it over to Marcia Dush.
And I would like to call on Ashley Rendon and Michelle Downey-Cranes to provide the MET online course review and also address the subsequent item.
Thank you, Ms. Dush. Ashley Rendon. Members, In 2013, the 83rd Texas legislature required the Pension Review Board to establish the minimum educational training program for trustees and system administrators of Texas public retirement systems, including in providing online training. We rolled out these 7 current online courses in the span of about a year, and that was nearly 5 years ago. So now we are going through each course to update them for changes in industry standards, best practices, including changes in law or Texas reporting requirements. Also, since each course has an optional anonymous evaluation at the end, staff is collecting and reviewing those evaluations and making adjustments as necessary to incorporate that feedback. For example, we had some feedback in particular about quiz questions. And so with that feedback, we're reviewing the quiz questions, and participants have to pass a final quiz for credit of those courses. And so we're reviewing those quiz questions for clarity and making sure that they participants are able to clearly get through those questions, and that's just one of the things that we're looking at. And so right now we're editing, staff is currently editing about half of the courses, and we hope to get through that review and update process by the end of the year. And that's all I have. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay, can we go on to the 2021 evaluation of PRB Educational Services?
Hello, I'll cover this one. Michelle Downey Cranes, Deputy Director. So we've just conducted the Educational Services Survey that we perform every 2 years. And in tab 7B, you'll see the results. We asked 6 total questions, 5 covering the different types of education and outreach and assistance that we provide, and then 1 overall satisfaction question, asking participants to rate our educational services on an overall basis. We had a total response rate of just under 14%, which is generally in line with about what we usually get. You'll see from the chart on page 2 of the report that the question measuring satisfaction there, thank you, with our TELFRA, our biennial TELFRA report that we prepare and publish, and our legislative session offerings, as well as the overall category, which is question 5, I'd say those scores were not as high as we'd like to see. And so I thought I'd highlight a few comments from those particular sections for the board. Actually, let me cover MET first, because I do want to spend a minute on, although I think our rating there was much better, we got good constructive feedback in the area of MET, and I want to provide that. So we've, in general, and we got this last survey as well, we've been asked to provide more advanced courses to count for continuing education, and specifically with more practical, like, real world application of material oriented towards plan administration and items such as interfacing with consultants, vendors, federal law, and relationships with sponsors. And so, that's something that we've long wanted to do, and I really hope that we'll be able to in the near future, or perhaps partner with one of our other accredited sponsors to provide. Then we also got a fair amount of comments saying that the continuing education offerings, they just need more. And I always like to think we as PRB are just one of the educational providers. We accredit many others who've been doing this as long as or longer than we have, and have great expertise to share. So it's not necessarily incumbent upon us to serve all needs, but I think that this survey helps give us a good idea of what the needs are out there to be filled in some way through good quality education. And so, you know, one of the comments specifically mentioned, I'll read it, that the basic training is very good, but it would help to have additional courses for those who completed the 7 basic courses. The respondent said they get pushback from their pension plan board about the limited selection of the same 7 courses. And I think what that's getting at is, you know, it may be a convenient option that board members after their first year of service can come back and take our 7 online courses again, or a few of them, to get their 4 hours of continuing education. But, you know, that's not ideal. And we understand that no one wants to ask their trustees to take the same material over and over. And so we'd very much like to provide more there. And then finally, I wanted to highlight, we received a number of comments related to our mission and our work in general that I wanted to be sure to bring the board's attention to. So I'll share a few of those. One said, the PRB appears to be anti-defined benefit and paints a negative picture towards all pension funds, including the ones that are well-funded. They also said that the PRB doesn't support or is definitely not working for the pension systems in Texas, and mentioned unfunded mandates. That is essentially the overall picture that I wanted to provide of the results here. But if board members have questions, I will help you.
This is Marcia. Did the commenters who provided those negative comments, did they give you anything else there?
Not in terms of detail and beyond the things that I read, not really. I guess we got a reporting agency that every session wants more power, and that's about it.
Okay, well, I would like to make just a couple of comments here. I made my desire to support defined benefit plans. I'm a great proponent of defined benefit plans, and I did make that clear when I was interviewed for this board position. I believe strongly that defined benefit plans are, in fact, a great way, an excellent way of providing retirement income. And so to some extent, if we could get any additional information about messaging that we are sending out, you know, while I haven't spoken to other board members on this subject, I know that where I stand on this, and my sense is that others are very supportive of defined benefit plans at all. I do wonder, I know that there have been a great deal of changes, and we've really been focusing on funding issues. And as I said earlier in today's meeting, I am very concerned that public plans could be converted into defined contribution plans unless we do some work at improving the funding status of the plans. And so, you know, as I said, you know, my first priority is making sure that the members get their benefits when they are due. I did a lot of work in my career with corporate plans and saw a lot of defined benefit plans be terminated, mostly because of financial reporting reasons. You know, when unfunded liabilities go on financial statements, that became a huge burden. And I am very concerned about how in the public plan arena, if the people who are doing credit ratings really negatively, if credit ratings are very negatively impacted because of a particular set of unfunded liabilities that go on a municipality's financial statements, that worries me. And so my goal is to really, you know, try to make sure that we shore up the funded status so that the credit ratings are not affected. And as I mentioned with respect to Midland, but it's in general, you know, a lot of these plans, the members do not participate in Social Security. They are contributing 10 to 15%, you know, maybe more or less than that to their plans, but a lot of them are very substantial, 10 to 15% of their pay. And again, I just want to be sure, pardon me, that that benefits, that the money is there to pay the benefits when they're due. So with that, and again, trying to make clear that, you know, I am a great proponent of defined benefit plans, and I want to find a way of making this work. So what I would really like to do is request that we have a committee meeting to take into account, you know, we take very seriously these comments and any additional information, you know, if it's provided anonymously, whatever, that helps clarify, you know, some of these messages that seem to be sent. I would appreciate it. And then we'll take a look at what we can do with respect to the training issues.
We'd be happy to work with you on that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle.
And if I could echo Marcia's comments, I agree and take the same position. I am a proponent of defined benefit pension plans. I'm also a proponent of defined contribution retirement savings plans. I, through my experience, understand the complexities of managing a defined benefit plan on many different levels. And sometimes those complexities combined with the lack of best practices or the lack of policies and procedures can lead to positions for certain pension plans that are negative and are viewed in that light. In other words, they have poor funding or poor liquidity, or, you know, the list goes on. And so I see my role, and I think as I'm learning more about the Texas Pension Review Board, I see my role as someone who can help find solutions, identify those plans, provide them with education, provide them with ideas and solutions, training and resources, and that's how I view the PRB, to make improvements. And so, you know, just stating my position out loud, it's not against pension plans. It is for pension plans, but like anything else, sometimes things need to be revised a bit in order to be successful.
This is Keith Brainerd. May I make a remark or two? I appreciate and share the views just expressed by Ms. Dush and Mr. Gonzalez. The one other thing that I would like to say, well, a couple things. I read these comments every time they're reported by the staff. I take them seriously. I appreciate those who take the time to record their comments. I would also say that providing educational content is a huge lift. It is a really big job and a difficult job. And as far as I know, the PRB has been given very, very little in the way of resources, specifically directed to providing educational content. And honestly, I hope that in the next legislative session, asking for additional resources to provide educational content, which is clearly warranted by, among other things, the results in this survey, will be a priority of ours. Thank you.
This is Marcia. I think that is all we have on this agenda item.
Okay, just before we move on, I guess the one ask that I have is that, you know, if a committee meeting of the Education Committee is convened, that, you know, in addition to kind of reviewing the comments and things that are provided as feedback related to the education courses that are provided, you know, if you all can just kind of brainstorm maybe any kind of low cost opportunities that there may be for us as a board, you know, to update some of those courses that are offered, going back to what Michelle had originally, you know, referenced about not asking trustees to provide the same ask the trustees to take the same courses over and over. If it's something as simple as, utilizing the wealth of resources that are available simply from our staff and tapping into their knowledge, whether it's a Q&A or online seminar or something that can be something that can be done either through a staff level, or even if, us board members are tapped on a one-on-one basis to speak in our area of expertise to provide some type of Q&A training video that could be easily converted into an online course. I think if the committee can, kind of look at that may be a somewhat low cost option that can be, implemented hopefully in the somewhat of a near term to update some of that online content. So if the committee could kind of consider that when or if the meeting is convened and then report back to the board, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay. Moving on to our next agenda item, we're going to receive an update on this last 87th legislative session. And for that, I'm going to call on Michelle Downey-Cranes to walk us through those updates.
Thank you, Chair Libby. But behind tab 8A, we have our pension bills of the 87th session report. And there are a number of bills in there. I was only planning to highlight 3 of them, those that, really will have an impact on funding and benefits. There are, of course, other bills that affected investments that systems are allowed to engage in. So several divestment bills, some return to work bills, and the TRS sunset bill. And I'll remind folks that teacher retirement system is not subject to abolishment, but they do undergo sunset review every 12 years like other state agencies. So the 3 bills I wanted to highlight have all been signed by the governor. The first, of course, is House Bill 3898, which is a result of legislative recommendations made by the Pension Review Board leading up to last session. That bill actually has 2 parts because it was originally filed with the funding policy and FSRP plan statute updates that we'd spent many hours developing. And then a second standalone bill, Senate Bill 1372, was added to it in the later stages. And that bill contained the legislative recommendations that the board made with regard to the investment practices and performance evaluations. And so let me go over, please, that portion of the bill first. So the changes to the investment evaluations, again, resulted from board recommendations, and they generally enhance disclosures, particularly related to conflicts of interest that could exist between the firm conducting the audit and the system or sponsor. The bill also establishes a review and comment process, and it does not include one of the recommendations which Mr. Zook spoke about earlier, which was to prohibit the existing investment consultant who developed the asset allocation from performing the evaluation. So again, just to be totally clear, firms going forward systems may still use existing investment consultants to conduct their next iteration of the evaluation. Then the other part of the bill, of course, pertaining to funding policies, will result in funding policies now being developed jointly with the plan sponsor, which was a priority of the board as we looked at all the funding policies we received last interim. And also the funding policy will need to be revised if an FSRP is triggered to make sure that those 2 plans line up together. And the way we generally look at it is that a funding policy is the initial, front end plan to get to where the system needs to be, and that the funding soundness or remediation plan is something that, if needed, provides a stopgap and a quick, opportunity for the plan and sponsor to get together and make critically needed changes to get back on path to the funding policy. So those two need to work in sync. On FSRP, I'll just try to stay high level here. Generally speaking, the biggest change is that the trigger for FSRPs goes down from 40 to 30. There is, as Ms. Dush spoke about earlier, some extensive implementation period and grandfathering for plans and their sponsors who have already been or are already implementing FSRPs, as long as they stay on track to hit those goals. Now, a question we received frequently was, will valuations begin to count towards the trigger when the bill becomes effective this September? The answer is yes, but the timing of that trigger, you need 3 consecutive or 2, depending how frequently you conduct your valuations. The timing lines up such that no plan would have to achieve 30 years before September 1st of 2025. Of course, that gives them a time frame to look at where they are now and, as was discussed earlier, try to make changes to get them where they need to be, which may include discount rate consideration as well. Another highlight is if a second FSRP is triggered within 10 years, moving forward with the new law, then a revised FSRP would have stricter requirements. So as just one of those, it'll have to be designed to achieve a 25-year amortization period. We've included some reference material after this bill report. You'll see some flow charts. Let's see on page, beginning on page 125 of the packet. And, these are important changes. We've begun trying to map them out. So this, I would say, is a preliminary look at, so that plans can start to understand how things will look in 2025. Although again, with grandfathering and the different ways in which the bill provides flexibility to plans at different stages, we definitely want to proactively provide more assistance as those things, start to become clearer, and we'll be adopting rules to implement the new bill. So of course, we'll be soliciting system feedback as we iron out those nuances, and we'll reach out to systems as well that are subject to FSRP currently or that are at risk, so that we can help guide them through what will happen between now and then. Barring any questions, I next plan to cover Senate Bill 321, which consists of funding and plan design changes for employees' retirement system. So this bill requires the state to make additional actuarially determined contributions to pay off the existing liabilities by 2054. It also created a cash balance plan for new members hired as of 9/1/2022. And so that gives the system a little bit of time to implement, because that'll be, of course, a big change to establish that new tier. Quickly, the cash balance plan, some features are it has a 6% member contribution into an individual account. It's a lifetime annuity, of course, figured based on the account balance, with a 150% employer match at retirement. And then it has a gain sharing mechanism. So first, there's a 4% guaranteed interest credit to the account balance annually, as well as a gain sharing credit of, half of the average investment return over 4% and up to 10%. So that equates to a maximum of 3% interest credit on top of the 4% that employees and retirees can earn. And that average investment return is calculated over the previous 5 years.
Michelle?
Yes, please.
Question, cash balance. There's another large system in Texas that is a cash balance. Can you remind me of which one it is? Is it TCDRS or?
Certainly.
CMRS?
You have named them both. There are two. They operate quite similarly, and they serve the cities of Texas and the counties and districts respectively.
All right, and a cash balance plan is still a defined benefit plan. I know there was some confusion based on some feedback that was provided to the legislature that they were going to a defined contribution plan. Cash balance, this tier of benefits is still a defined benefit plan, and retirement benefits will be, annuity-based, guaranteed for life, and which is what makes it a defined benefit. And the fact that there are interest rate guarantees, irregardless of what the assets earn, makes it a defined benefit plan.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, House Bill 4368 made funding and plan design changes to Austin Police Retirement System. Here you saw a member contribution increase of 2%, taking the member rate from 13 to 15%. That'll go into effect in January of 2022. There's also a phased-in city contribution increase to pay off the existing unfunded liability over a 30-year period. And importantly, the bill going forward establishes an actuarially determined contribution within a corridor to moderate contribution volatility and ensure that the fund receives adequate contributions. Then there are also provisions related to if the corridor max is hit, the plan and city needing to come back together to enter into further discussions to deal with that. The bill also instituted a lower benefit tier for Austin Police, again, as of January of 2022, and that had a reduced multiplier, changes to eligibility and to final average salary. And finally, on that bill, there were also some governance changes. I'd highlight that an active member was replaced with a citizen member, and board experience requirements were added for that position in experience and expertise of finance and investments. And then finally, the board's authority to make benefit changes or recommend contribution changes will essentially phase out, and the legislature would have to make those types of changes. That's all I plan to talk about, but certainly there are a lot of bills in this report. If members have any questions, please let us know.
So I don't think I have any questions, and I think, the comment that I make is probably going to touch on some of the information that, we've discussed previously in the meeting, some of the information that you kind of touched on related to the changes provided by 3898, some of the feedback that was received from the education, the continuing education research courses, and, kind of something that Marcia had touched on earlier in the meeting. But, with the changes to 3898 and the funding soundness restoration plan coming just after, the legislative session where, the investment expense reporting and the investment practices and performance evaluations were implemented, for both the agency, the board, and, our interactions with retirement systems. There has been a lot of change that's occurred over, the last, I guess, 2.5 years. And we can kind of discuss this further when we get into some of the other agenda items for today. But I do think that, there's a lot on the plate of the board and the agency related to these, newly enacted laws. And as Marcia and I think it was, Chris had said earlier, I think the focus of this board should be, to provide that guidance to the pension plans to ensure that, if not best practices, something akin to best practices is implemented on a moving forward basis to ensure kind of long-term, really sound funding to ensure the viability of these funds can be sustained, and that, it should probably be a focus of this board and the agency. to provide, you know, some kind of long-term or big picture focus, and identifying ways in which we can, you know, provide assistance to systems that, you know, really may be in need of that assistance. And I think that assistance comes, you know, like I said before, both through the legislative directives from the last session, which was the investment expense reporting and the investment practices and performance evaluations. And then, you know, these more recent changes to the FSRP itself.
Madam Chair, yes to everything you just said, and I'd like to elaborate just briefly on that, and by saying that this is at least the third consecutive legislative session in which the legislature has granted a substantial portion of this board's legislative recommendations. And that would not happen were it not for our staff, who is over there regularly during the session explaining this board's priorities. And I think we would be remiss to not recognize and express our appreciation for the work that the staff did over at the legislature to help get our priorities fulfilled. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with you.
But I would also say, this is Marcia, it seems that the legislature is also genuinely concerned about funding these retirement programs and making sure that they are adequately funded. Otherwise, they wouldn't be listening to the recommendations that we've been given. And I think we've taken some lead based on what the legislators have said to us.
Thank you, members. Anumeha Kumar, we very much appreciate y'all's guidance and support here. And to Stephanie's point, given we are going to talk about the next few agenda items, and I'll just mention it here, with the FSRP changes, funding policy changes, changes with regards to the investment performance evaluation, investment expense, I think it's incumbent on the board to provide rules so we can continue to assist systems in implementing these new requirements, and that's going to take some time, and that's going to be the agency's focus as well, working under the board's guidance, of course, in promulgating, working with the stakeholders and promulgating those rules, given, especially with the FSRP changes, the information we have included in the packet with our attempt with some infographics, which staff did an incredible job of putting together. And this is just the first step. The requirements moving forward with grandfathering is complex. And so we would very much appreciate working with our systems in developing these rules and continuing to provide assistance and guidance with these new requirements over the course of this interim. Thank you.
Okay. And so I know that we're kind of, I mean, a lot of these things are really directly interrelated to each other, but just following through on the agenda as it relates to the legislative session and the legislative update for the bills that that Michelle has provided an overview to us on this afternoon. Does any board members have additional comments on those bills specifically? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next section of the agenda related to legislative session, which is going to be an update on our budget appropriation for this next state biennium, and then some revisions to our governing statute, and then going back to some needs for additional rules that Anu had alluded to. And so with that, I will turn this over to Anu for her to walk us through this next agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I promise I'll be brief here. With our 2022-23 budget, I wanted to inform the board that we were very fortunate this session. The legislature was very considerate and supportive of our budget request. Just a quick reminder, if you'll recall, members, our original exceptional item request that we made at the beginning of session pertained to the reinstatement of the 5% budget cut, which was instituted by the legislature in response to the budgetary constraints that the state was facing due to the pandemic. And so one of our requests, of course, was for reinstatement of that 5% cut, and that was approved by the legislature. And we are very thankful, given how small we are. Every cent, I suppose, counts. And so for the 2022-23 upcoming biennium, our baseline budget is exactly the same as it was this past biennium, or I should say the current 2021 biennium, close to 1.1 million for each fiscal year, and our FTE count remained the same. Now, we did have the opportunity during session to make an additional request for a one-time funding, which we did with regards to our IT projects that have been long overdue. However, board had agreed to defer those requests to next session, given the budgetary challenges that the state was facing at the beginning of session. However, given that opportunity, we requested and received an additional one-time funding of $600,000 for the IT projects that we have to work on. And some of two major projects that I'm going to quickly mention here are with regards to creating a web-based interface for our internal database that houses all of our actuarial, investment, financial, MET-related information that we receive from our retirement systems. The current internal database that we have was developed on a software that's now aging and is going to be discontinued. And so this funding is very timely because we are also currently experiencing some functionality failures with our database. So that's a project, IT project, that we will be focusing on immediately to get started. And then the other item I wanted to mention here with regards to our IT funding is to create a self-service portal for our retirement systems to use, so they can upload their plan reports as well as view compliance in a more accessible way, rather than trying to email us those cumbersome reports. So those are the two main. There are going to be some additional projects, IT-related projects, that we will be working on during this interim to make sure that, of course, we spend the one-time funding we have received carefully, responsibly, and it is going to require some work on the part of staff as well. So that's something we will be working on with the board, under the guidance of the board, to fulfill leading up to next session. Moving on, members, if you don't have any questions, the next agenda item that I wanted to mention was the revision of the government code pamphlet that we put together after every session. So that's something we will be, of course, working on. It's going to require, given the changes the legislature made with regards to Chapter 802 and a few other provisions in the government code, it's going to require some work, but we wanted to inform the board that we will be bringing an updated government code publication to the next board meeting. And then finally, I know we've already talked about rulemaking, but that's something, again, staff will start doing the legwork to bring to the board, start that process of developing rules with regards to the FSRP changes. And we will be working with, hopefully, the Actuarial Committee and then the full board. And our goal is to start with the FSRP funding policy rules and then work our way up to for the ITPE changes. That's the next set of rules we will be working on, but to start with the funding policy and FSRP rules. Moving on, members, if y'all don't have any questions. We've already worked through agenda items 9 and 10. So if members are okay, I'm going to jump right into the ED report. We just recently, the Texas Workforce Commission Civil Rights Division just recently completed its review of the agency's personnel policies and procedures. That's something TWC is required to do under the Labor Code, and we were certified certified as compliant by the Workforce Commission. And I would like to mention here, members, that staff, Wes and Lindsay, really worked hard on this review. And what we heard from TWC, given if you consider our HR team, if we have one, right, we are so small, we don't have a dedicated HR team. Staff, as you know, wears all kinds of different hats to make sure we continue to implement our mandates and function. One of TWC's comments as part of this review was that our HR team stands out as an example that all agencies wish for. So I just wanted to mention that, given I'm very proud of all the work that our staff does. TWC's report basically said that the agency is going above and beyond, following all the best practices with regards to personnel policies and procedures that TWC recommends. Moving on, members.
Just real quick before you move on, I just want to echo the congratulations that you provided to staff. I mean, to be recognized in such a manner with the limited staff that we have, and with what was expected of staff and the guidance that was provided in the last legislative session and the work that has been ongoing. I mean, for you all to go above and beyond, you know, just speaks to the integrity of the agency itself and the job well done that's really being done in every aspect of the day-to-day congratulations, or to the day-to-day operations. So congratulations to you all for that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate those comments very much. The next update that I have is regarding the 2021 operating budget. All that I have to say here is we are on track, and we do have to give some money back, of course, to the legislature, given the 5% cut did apply to the 2021 budget. But regardless of that, we are on track, and that's all I have to say there. We do have an action item on the next budget. That's the 2022 operating budget. Of course, it mirrors our GAA budget pattern. So if you all could approve the 2022 budget for the agency, that would be very much appreciated.
Okay, at this time, the chair will entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2022 operating budget as presented.
Christopher Zook, so moved.
Marcia Dash, second.
Okay, the motion has been made by Mr. Zook and seconded by Mrs. Dush to approve the fiscal year 2020 operating budget as presented. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay, there's a motion been made to approve the fiscal year 2022 operating budget as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. At this time, I will have to drop off of today's meeting, so I will pass the virtual gavel over to Vice Chair Brainerd to take you all through the remainder of the meeting. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Still on agenda item 11. Anu will provide us with a staff update.
Thank you, Chair Brainerd. I feel like every time I provide an update regarding our FTE, it seems like I have good news and bad news. The good news is we do have a new staff member, Madeline Jarman. She joined the PRB as a policy analyst, and she's currently completing her master's in public affairs over at the LBJ school. She started with us at the beginning of session and hit the ground running by learning very quickly about the legislative process and as well as playing a critical role in contributing, working with us through session. And just a quick mention, Madeline also worked on our education services survey that was discussed earlier on the agenda. So we are very excited to have her as part of our team. And the bad news that I have is we did lose our actuarial analyst, James King, moved on to work with the private sector. And currently we have 3 vacant positions that we are looking to fill. Next item on the agenda is an update on virtual meetings. Unfortunately, some of the bills that were going through this session regarding allowing governmental entities to hold virtual meetings did not pass. However, it's our understanding the governor's COVID-19 related disaster declaration is still in place, and as long as that declaration remains in place, the Open Meetings Act suspension allowing virtual meetings should apply, but we will keep the board posted if that were to change, as well as provide a heads up regarding our upcoming September board meeting, whether that's going to be in person or still a virtual meeting.
Questions on that? Thank you. On to the data center.
Thank you, members. We have included a few screenshots from our public pension data center. We are very proud of the data center that we created, of course, back in 2019. And then last year, we put in a lot of work to enhance the user interface aesthetics, as well as add some helpful accessibility features for our constituents. So we just wanted to provide a quick update on that, as well as a reminder, and we will continue our work on the data center. If you all have any input, please feel free to provide it. And we encourage everyone to go to our data center, review the information. Again, we have individual plan, comparative, aggregate information. We are trying to add, earlier during the meeting, there was some discussion about comparison with national averages. Those are the types of data points we are trying to add to the data we have on the data center. And please, again, if you have any input changes, feel free to let us know.
Terrific. Yes, I'll repeat Anu's invitation for everybody within the sound of my voice to check that out. And I know that staff would be interested in any comments or suggestions you have. Thank you. And on to Anu, on to the TechSpurs Summer Forum.
Thank you, members. There is TechSpurs Summer Educational Forum coming up. I believe it's on August 29th through the 31st in San Antonio. So if members are interested in attending the conference, please let us know and we will make that happen. And I believe it's an in-person conference this time around.
Great, thank you. Questions on TechSpurs? Any other items that Anu has raised here? Hearing none, on to agenda item 12, call for future PRB agenda items.
Keith, Marcia Dush here.
Yes, ma'am.
Just as we discussed in the MET and survey results, I think that the Education Committee should report back at the next board meeting. And so hopefully we can have something at least preliminary to say about addressing some of the concerns that were surfaced in that survey.
Duly noted. Thank you. On to agenda item 13, date and location of the next meeting, Thursday, September 16th. The location of the next board meeting is still to be determined due to the suspension of certain Texas Open Meeting Act regulations and the governor's disaster declaration, which allowed for virtual telemeetings. There were no bills passed this session permitting the continuation of such meetings, so the board and staff will be notifying members of the public in advance if the next board meeting will be held in person. Comments, questions on that? Next is our invitation for public comment for those who would like to address the board. Before you do so, please state your name and the organization you represent, and you have 3 minutes. Does anyone wish to report to the board?
And this is Ashley Rendon. I just wanted to remind anybody on the phone, if they are currently muted, they would just need to press *6 to unmute themselves.
If anybody would like to address the board, now is your opportunity. If you're on the phone, please press *6. If you're on the call, be sure to unmute. Going once, going twice.
Hello?
Yes, please tell us your name and the organization you represent.
Shara Crow with Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund.
Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Stacy couldn't be here, so he asked me to put on record that our most recent request from James King dated May 7th was not included in this board packet for the PRB meeting. And Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund has responded to all of the items with the exception of item 7, which will take some time to pull and submit. We are working on that, but we're currently in the middle of an audit to meet the July 29th deadline. Kenny has responded back to the fund, to me personally, and let us know that they will be reviewing this information and get back with me as soon as possible. So I just wanted to make that public record for Mr. Stacy. And then also, I wanted to state that the PRB has been given our permission to speak with our third-party actuary and financial analyst, with the caveat that at least one of the board members would be included in all communication, verbally or email, written, whatever form the PRB chooses to reach out to them.
Thank you for that information, and please pass our appreciation on to Mr. Stacy as well. Does that conclude your remarks?
Yes, sir, I believe that's all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the board at this time? *6 on your phone, unmute your computer. Hearing no one, I will close that agenda item, and I would consider a motion for adjournment.
Christopher Zook, so moved.
Moved by Mr. Zook. Is there a second?
Marcia Dash seconds.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone's patience and indulgence. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.